The doctor who stayed late St. Agnes Hospital, nestled between the graying apartment towers and neon-lit bodegas of East Hollow, had seen better days. The walls were tired, the linoleum floors scuffed beyond repair, and the waiting room clock always 5 minutes slow. But to Dr. Ludwig Humboldt, the hospital was home. Not the kind of home filled with warmth, but the kind you return to because it knows your secrets. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a sharp jaw and steel blue eyes that gave away little. Colleagues called him the Machine, not out of admiration, but because Ludwig never faltered. 12-hour shifts, back-to-back surgeries, code blues at 3 a.m., he handled them all with unshakable calm. But there was one detail no one knew. Every day, under his pristine white lab coat, Ludwig wore a bulletproof vest. 2. The letter. 2 years earlier, it had started with a letter slipped under his windshield wiper. Open quote, "You saved the wrong man, he'll kill again, but you won't live to fix it." Close quote. The handwriting was jagged, angry, no return address. It had arrived 3 days after Ludwig had performed emergency surgery on Miguel Alvarez, a notorious gang leader wounded in a shootout. Miguel had 3 bullets in him when he was wheeled into the ER, bleeding out fast. Everyone hesitated, except Ludwig. He opened Miguel's chest like a book, rethreaded arteries, patched a shredded lung, and brought him back from the brink. To Ludwig, it was just another life, another procedure, another heartbeat saved. But not everyone agreed. A week later, a rival gang member was shot in the hospital parking lot. The body was left slumped over the hood of a nurse's car, eyes still open. 3. The night of the shooting. It was a Thursday, late August, sticky with the kind of heat that never lifted. Ludwig stayed late again. He had just closed up after a complicated thoracic surgery and was reviewing notes in the staff lounge. Nurses filtered out. The janitor, Mrs. Tenley, gave him a tired wave and disappeared down the hallway with her mop. The silence was thick. Then came the first sound. Pop. At first it was distant, like a pipe bursting or a cart tipping over. Then a second. Pop, pop, and screaming. Ludwig froze. He glanced toward the hallway. 2 security guards bolted past the break room, one shouting into his radio. His instincts kicked in. He reached under the table, grabbed his coat, and checked the vest underneath. Tight. Secure. He exhaled slowly. Then the hallway door burst open. A man stood there, masked, tall, holding a Glock. "Dr. Humboldt?" the voice asked, low and icy. Ludwig raised his hands. "You don't want to do this. You don't get to decide that." The gun raised. Bang! The impact pain exploded in Ludwig's chest, not deep, not like death, but the sheer force knocked him into the wall. He collapsed to his knees, winded, gasping, but alive. The bulletproof vest had held. The shooter hesitated, confused, stepping forward for a second shot. But Ludwig wasn't dazed. He reached for the metal stool beside him and swung it into the man's legs. The gun skittered across the floor. They fought, scrambling, fists flailing, one man desperate, the other deadly calm. Footsteps thundered behind them. Security tackled the shooter and pinned him to the tile. Ludwig leaned back against the wall, chest heaving. His lab coat was torn, and the vest beneath was blackened and cracked at the impact site. The shooter's mask was ripped off. Ludwig stared. It was Rafael Santiago, a former patient's brother. He'd sat across from Ludwig weeks ago in tears, begging him to let his brother die rather than save a killer like Miguel Alvarez. Ludwig hadn't replied then. He didn't speak now either. V. The silence. After Raphael was taken away in handcuffs, the hospital went into lockdown for the night. Ludwig sat alone in the staff lounge, bruised and silent. The police asked questions. Hospital administrators fumbled for statements. The news vans arrived by dawn. He declined interviews. To most, he was a hero. To Ludwig, it was inevitable. The past revisited. Long before medicine, Ludwig had served in a field trauma unit overseas. He'd learned back then that not every life could be saved and not every life should be, but he had taken an oath. And when he left the military, he traded camo for a coat, adrenaline for antiseptic, bullets for scalpels. But the war had followed him here. Not in explosions or bloodied sand, but in silence, in letters, in masked gunmen who knew his name. He thought often of the oath. First, do no harm. But sometimes he wondered, what if doing good puts others in harm's way? 1 year later, the hospital remodeled the East Wing and installed new security systems, metal detectors, reinforced doors, even silent panic buttons at every nurse's station. Staff rotated shifts more cautiously. Fewer people worked alone after midnight. But Dr. Ludwig Humboldt still did. He continued his late night rounds, walking those dim corridors with the same quiet intensity. His colleagues assumed he had moved on, that he had healed. But every morning before his shift, Ludwig still strapped on his bulletproof vest, not out of fear, but out of resolve. He understood now, saving lives didn't make you untouchable. It made you a target for someone else's pain. The weight of the vest no longer felt foreign. It was part of the uniform, his own silent acknowledgement that the world he lived in, the people he served, came with risks no oath could fully protect him from. And stitched into the inner lining of his coat, just above his heart, were 6 simple words. Open quote, I save lives, including my own. Close quote. And that was enough. 8. A new oath. A year had passed since the shooting, and yet the echo of it still clung to Ludwig like lint on his coat. Though he carried no scars the eye could see, he felt changed. The hospital still needed him, but it had also become something else, a battlefield dressed up in antiseptic and fluorescent lights. Despite the reinforced security and added cameras, something inside him whispered, "It's not over." On a cold January morning, Ludwig found himself called into the trauma bay again. A 16-year-old boy had been brought in, gunshot to the abdomen. His name was Elijah Torres. Just a kid, unconscious, bleeding out fast. Ludwig worked through instinct, commanding the room, glove by glove, clamp by clamp. He saved Elijah's life. But the boy's blood had splattered across Ludwig's vest. When the shift ended, he sat alone in the locker room, peeling off the stained fabric. He stared at it for a long time, then folded it carefully, not with reverence, but with quiet ritual. He didn't change into civilian clothes. Instead, he went back upstairs to Elijah's room. The boy's mother was there, trembling in a chair, fingers knotted in prayer. She looked up when Ludwig entered. Is he? He's going to live, Ludwig said. She burst into tears. But Ludwig didn't feel triumphant. He felt tired, not from surgery, from something deeper. A few days later, a manila envelope arrived in his hospital mailbox. No name, no return address. Inside was a photo. It was him, taken from a distance, walking out of the hospital, adjusting the strap on his bulletproof vest beneath his coat. Written in black marker across the bottom, still hiding behind it? No threats, just the question. He stared at it for a long time, his hands cold. The message wasn't from Raphael. That much he knew. Raphael was still in prison. This was someone else. Someone watching. He considered telling security, but something inside him resisted. He folded the photo and slipped it into his coat pocket. He started to wear the vest not just during night shifts, but always. Every shift, every day. Even on short rounds, even when reviewing files in the clinic wing. A few nurses noticed. They joked about it. You expecting another shootout, Dr. H? He smiled, but didn't answer, because he wasn't afraid. He was preparing. X, the return of Alvarez. Then one evening, Miguel Alvarez came back. It had been nearly 3 years since Ludwig saved him. Now, the ex-gang leader rolled into the ER with a limp, flanked by 2 bodyguards in dark suits. The registration clerk called Ludwig immediately. Thought you'd want to know, she whispered. Ludwig stood outside the glass doors, staring at Miguel, older now, a few gray hairs, more tattoos. Their eyes met. Miguel smirked. Doc, he said. Long time. What happened? Old injuries, bullet fragments pressing into my spine. You want me to fix you again? Miguel leaned in. You're the only one I trust. Ludwig looked at him, unblinking. That trust is misplaced. Miguel's smile faltered. You gonna let me die this time? I won't let anyone die, but I won't forget who you are. For the first time, Miguel looked vulnerable. I'm trying to be someone else. Ludwig stared at him, then nodded. We'll see. He ordered scans, prepped a team, and again, under bright surgical lights, he stepped into the gray. The photographer. 2 weeks after Miguel Alvarez's surgery, Ludwig was called into a quiet meeting with hospital security. The head of security, a stern former cop named DeMarco, had something to show him. Surveillance footage, blurry but clear enough. A man, standing across the street, watching. Same time, every night, for the past 8 days. He never enters the hospital, DeMarco said. Just waits, takes a photo, leaves. Ludwig leaned in. What kind of photo? DeMarco handed him a print. It was Ludwig again, this time taken from the side as he adjusted his stethoscope, the edge of the vest clearly visible beneath the coat, a black strap peeking out near his collar. He knows, Ludwig said quietly. Knows what? That I wear it. DeMarco hesitated. You think this guy is connected to the old shooting? Ludwig didn't answer, but deep down, he knew. This was no random voyeur, this was personal. Tarvitswive, the message that night, Ludwig received a message on his private hospital email. Subject line, not enough Kevlar. Attached, a single frame of security footage, Ludwig walking through the ER, a blurry figure circled in the background, and a line of text. Open quote, you hide behind cloth and carbon fiber, but you're still just flesh. Close quote. Ludwig didn't flinch. He forwarded the message to DeMarco, then walked back to his office, shut the door, and sat for a long time. He thought of Raphael, of the photo, of Miguel's smirk. And then he opened his drawer and pulled out something new, a second vest, heavier, military grade, something he hadn't worn in years. He ran his fingers over the label. He thought he had moved past this, that he could live without looking over his shoulder. But now it was clear. Someone was testing him. And this time, they were watching more closely. Third. The trap, Ludwig made a decision. He wouldn't wait for the threat to come to him. He would invite it. He switched shifts, taking a high-profile trauma slot, nights, weekends, hours when the ER was most chaotic. He told no one. Then he stopped wearing the vest, or so it appeared. Instead, he wore a replica, a decoy vest made of foam and nylon. Bulky but useless, a baited hook. He wanted the watcher to see it, to think he'd grown careless. For days, nothing happened. Then on a Friday just past midnight, it did. Shot. The shot, a code silver, was called. Gunman in the lobby. Masked, armed, shouting for Dr. Humbolt. Ludwig was in trauma room 4, stitching up a patient with a collapsed lung. Nurses screamed and scattered. Panic bled through the walls. But Ludwig didn't run. He walked to the ER entrance. There, framed by the flickering light of the vending machines, stood a tall man in black. Mask on. Gun raised. You think you're safe, the voice growled. You think that vest saves you. Ludwig didn't speak. You let murderers live, let monsters breathe, but I see you. Then he fired. The bullet hit Ludwig square in the chest. He collapsed. Ax 50, the reveal. Seconds passed. Then Ludwig stirred. He sat up. Blood pooled around his coat, but not from him. The bullet had shattered the fake vest and embedded into a thin steel trauma plate beneath it. Hidden, quiet, almost invisible. A backup inside the decoy. The shooter froze. Security rushed in, tackled, disarmed. Ludwig rose slowly, chest aching but intact. He walked over and pulled the mask off the shooter. It wasn't a former patient. It wasn't Raphael. It wasn't even a gang member. It was an ex-surgeon, Dr. Glenn Harrow, once a promising trauma doctor, fired years ago after Ludwig testified in a malpractice hearing. You ruined me, Harrow whispered, defeated. No, Ludwig said quietly. You ruined yourself. He turned to the guards. Take him. 6. The weight of the vest. Later that night, Ludwig sat alone in the break room, his torn decoy vest beside him. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from realization. The war hadn't followed him. He had never left it. And he wasn't just fighting to save lives anymore. He was fighting to survive the ones he couldn't save. He looked at the trauma plate, scratched, dented. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the first photo, the one with the message. He wrote 3 new words beneath it. Open quote, still standing, always. The surgeon who wouldn't die. The news spread fast. Doctor survives hospital shooting again. Bulletproof doc, Humboldt dodges death twice. Hero or target? Within days, Ludwig was flooded with emails. Interview requests, journalists waiting in the parking garage, young residents shadowing his every move like he was a myth brought to life. But Ludwig didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man running out of luck. Security increased again. Metal detectors were installed at all entrances. Staff were issued panic buttons. The hospital became more fortress than sanctuary. Still, patients came. One in particular stood out. The boy with the tattoo, his name was Jordan El Sayed, 19 years old, a gunshot wound to the hip. Quiet, alert, not bleeding much. Ludwig examined him, noting the faded ink on the boy's arm, a crow with a serpent in its beak. It wasn't just a tattoo, it was a symbol, a gang emblem. Not from around here. Where'd you get this? Ludwig asked casually, pointing to the ink. Jordan met his gaze. Somewhere far from here. You're not local? Does it matter? It does if someone's coming to finish the job. Jordan smirked. Maybe they already tried. Ludwig paused. You saying the shot was for me? Jordan said nothing, but his eyes said everything. Night Deinken, the man in the stairwell. That night, Ludwig took the stairs instead of the elevator. The hospital was quiet, eerie in its stillness. On the second floor landing, a man stood waiting, dressed in scrubs, no ID badge, wrong shoes. Ludwig stopped. You lost? The man smiled. No, just waiting for the doctor who doesn't die. Ludwig didn't respond. His hand hovered near the emergency call button clipped to his belt. You saved someone you shouldn't have, the man continued, and now someone else wants to return the favor. He tossed something at Ludwig's feet. A bullet. It clinked once, then rolled to a stop. Tell Jordan, Cairo remembers. Then he disappeared down the stairwell. XX, Patterns and Ghosts. Later that night, Ludwig sat in the security office with DeMarco. They rewound footage, frame by frame, no trace of the man. I'm not even sure the cameras caught him, DeMarco muttered. It's like he knew where every blind spot was. Ludwig picked up the bullet. It had a symbol etched into its side, a serpent's fang. It's a message, he said. They're not after me this time. DeMarco narrowed his eyes. You think they're after the kid? I think Jordan wasn't the target of that gunshot. He was the bait. To draw you out? Ludwig looked at the bullet again. No, he said, to put him in my hands. The Watcher returns. 3 days later, a new email arrived. Subject, how many lives can you carry? Attached, a photo of Ludwig standing over Jordan's hospital bed, taken through the glass. Then another. Ludwig walking to his car. Another. Ludwig alone in the stairwell. The final photo wasn't of Ludwig at all. It was of his daughter, taken outside her school. No message, no threats, just the image. It said more than words ever could. Ludwig stood frozen. Then he rose, walked out of his office, and headed straight for DeMarco. Lock down everything. My house, my family, the hospital. DeMarco nodded grimly. You expecting another shooter? No, Ludwig said. I'm expecting a war. The Maze of Mercy. The hospital had always been a place of order, logic, and healing. But since the latest threats, it had taken on a new shape, a maze of shifting shadows and locked doors. Security guards now roamed the halls like sentries. Lights stayed on in the stairwells. Every visitor passed through metal detectors. But Ludwig knew, no wall stops a ghost. He began sleeping less, pacing more, watching, listening. Every night the same question burned in him, why me? He wasn't the only doctor saving lives, but someone had chosen him. Someone who knew every hallway, every blind spot in the cameras, every rotation of his shifts. Then, on a Thursday night just past 3 a.m., that someone finally made their move. The cornering. Ludwig had just finished surgery. He was walking down sub-level 2, a hallway between pathology and the old decommissioned psych ward, long closed, half lit, and usually deserted. That's when the lights flickered, then dimmed, then died. He stopped. Footsteps, not rushed, deliberate, slow. He turned. A figure emerged from the shadows, not masked, not armed, but terrifying in his stillness. He was tall, late 40s, dressed in charcoal scrubs, familiar in a way that scraped at Ludwig's memory. You're finally alone, the man said, his voice smooth as glass. You've been following me, Ludwig replied. I've been documenting you, the man said with a grin. Collecting moments, studying your patterns. I wanted to see what it would take to break the bulletproof doctor. Ludwig's eyes flicked to the red alarm box on the wall, too far to reach. What do you want? I want to see who you really are without the armor, without the headlines, just you, vulnerable, mortal. He stepped closer. You saved my brother. Ludwig's breath caught. Who? Julian Cross. You pulled him out of a coma after that warehouse shooting. He died 6 weeks later because you gave him a second chance. Ludwig remembered the name. A gang enforcer, brought in with a collapsed lung and brain trauma. He'd barely survived, discharged, then shot dead again. You're blaming me for that? Ludwig said. I'm thanking you. The man leaned in. Because you made him believe he could walk away from the life. You gave him hope. Hope killed him. Ludwig's voice was low now. You're insane. I'm what you made, the man whispered. And then he pulled out a small scalpel. Medical grade. You wear vests for bullets, doctor, but I wonder, did you ever armor your throat? Sex of 14. Ludwig didn't wait. He lunged. They crashed against the wall, the scalpel slashing the air. Ludwig grabbed the man's wrist, twisted, but the stalker was stronger, more prepared. He pinned Ludwig with a knee to the chest. The scalpel rose, and then, blam! A deafening crack. The man toppled over, groaning, shot through the leg. Behind them stood Jordan, the young gang member Ludwig had treated weeks earlier. In one hand, he held a discarded security guard's pistol. In the other, his phone. "I called security," Jordan said. "They're coming." Ludwig stared at him, panting, blood on his coat, heart pounding. "Why did you come here?" Jordan shrugged. "You patched me up. Figured I owed you one." Ludwig blinked. "I thought you were bait. I was. But maybe now I'm also the hook." XXV, the man behind the camera. The attacker survived. His name was Marcus Cross, brother to Julian, former medical student, dropped out after a psychiatric break. He had been living in abandoned buildings, posing as a hospital vendor, slipping past security under fake credentials. He used hospital staff photos to get camera angles, map patrol routes, used dark web forums to study bulletproof gear. His obsession wasn't just with Ludwig, it was with the idea of invincibility. He didn't want to kill the man. He wanted to unmask the myth. "I needed to see fear in his eyes," Marcus later told police. "I never saw it." Attic 66, the hollow triumph. Ludwig stood in front of a mirror in the locker room later that night. He peeled off the vest, laid it down, looked at himself, pale, tired, ribs sore from being pinned, but alive. He traced the faint line of the scalpel cut along his collarbone. Not deep, but real. He thought about Jordan, about Marcus, about the camera flash in the stairwell, the photo of his daughter, the rage in Miguel's eyes. He wasn't bulletproof, never had been, but he was still here, still standing. And maybe that was enough. 2 months after Marcus Cross's arrest, Dr. Ludwig Humboldt submitted his resignation to Mercy General. He left the letter on his desk, packed his things in silence, and walked through the ER one last time without a sound. No announcement, no farewell party. Just quiet nods from those who understood. He was done being the symbol, done being the target, but he wasn't done saving lives. He just needed a new battlefield. St. Jude Memorial. St. Jude Memorial Hospital was on the other side of the city, smaller, quieter, less chaotic, but with a rising reputation for cutting-edge trauma care. It was Ludwig's kind of place, overlooked but essential. His arrival was met with raised eyebrows. The staff had heard of him. All of them. Just the man in the vest, the doctor who survived 2 shootings, the trauma surgeon who never flinched. But Ludwig wasn't here for attention. He was here for distance, for silence, and maybe for a chance to breathe. 5A. Before his first shift at St. Jude, Ludwig opened a box delivered to his new office. Inside was a new vest. Custom made, NIJ level 5A. It was the kind of armor you'd find in a war zone, capable of stopping rifle rounds, with trauma plates built into the front and back. The outer surface was reinforced Kevlar carbon weave, deceptively light and thin. He ran his fingers over the inner panel. Embroidered in clean thread, open quote, LH, still standing, close quote. He slid the vest on, it fit like a second skin. And beneath the white of his new lab coat, it was invisible. Just like before, but stronger. This time, he wasn't just surviving, he was ready. XXX. The patient in room 302. St. Jude's trauma floor wasn't as busy, but it had its shadows. One patient stood out on Ludwig's first week. A young woman, late 20s, brought in with multiple stab wounds, unconscious, no ID, no family. The nurses called her Jane Doe 302. But Ludwig recognized the pattern of the wounds. Too precise, surgical. They weren't random. Someone had tried to kill her cleanly and failed. As he checked her vitals, he noticed something strange. A thin black mark on her left wrist. Faded, almost like a tattoo of a serpent's fang. The rifleman, Ludwig, began digging. He pulled security footage from the ER the night Jane Doe was brought in. It had one gap, 7 minutes of darkness during a brief outage. But before the blackout, there was a man in the waiting room, tall, black jacket, carrying a guitar case. He never checked in, just watched the ER doors, then vanished. Ludwig knew the pattern. He wasn't a visitor. He was a rifleman. And Jane Doe wasn't just a victim. She was a target gone wrong. Tweed, under the coat. That night, Ludwig walked the halls of St. Jude long after his shift ended. He kept his coat on, felt the weight of the new vest hugging his chest. His past hadn't stayed at Mercy General. The storm had followed him. He passed room 302. The woman still unconscious, still breathing. Whatever she'd been involved in, it wasn't over. And now he was in it. Again. He looked down at his own hands. Calloused. Steady. Then whispered to himself, open quote, still standing, still armored, still here, close quote, and walked on. When the serpent wakes. She woke up at 4:17 a.m. Room 302's monitors beeped softly, signaling a shift in vitals. A nurse on night watch caught it first, then called Ludwig. By the time he arrived, the woman was sitting up, pale but alert, her eyes scanning the room like someone calculating the quickest exits. Ludwig stepped in. "Good morning," he said gently. "You've been out for a few days." She didn't respond. "I'm Dr. Humboldt. You came in with stab wounds, no ID. Do you remember anything?" Still nothing. But her eyes, they locked on his chest, or rather just under his coat. "You're wearing it," she said at last. "What?" "The vest." Ludwig tensed. "How do you know that?" She just smiled faintly. "Because I used to wear one too." Sex 14. Her name was Kael. She gave her name only after much hesitation. Kael. No last name. Her voice was low, almost dry from disuse. Her story, though fragmented, was sharp. "I used to run logistics for a contractor," she said. "We moved cargo through conflict zones, medical supplies, weapons, people." "Legal?" Ludwig asked. Kael smiled. "Define that for me." She disappeared off the map after a mission in Cairo went bad. One of her men died. Another turned rogue. Someone wanted her gone ever since. "They don't shoot twice," she said. "That knife wasn't a threat. It was a message to anyone who thought I was still alive." She stared at him. "And you, doctor? Why do you wear the vest?" Ludwig didn't answer. Kael already knew. Stash XX 4th, the flash drive. 2 nights later, a man tried to break into room 302. Security stopped him, but he didn't have a weapon. He had a package. When opened, it contained a single USB flash drive with a note. Open quote for the doctor. Play it alone. Close quote. Ludwig took it to his office, locked the door, and inserted the drive into his encrypted terminal. One video file. He clicked. The footage began. XXX the Sif's footage from the dead. The screen showed Marcus Cross, Ludwig's former stalker, in an interrogation room, months ago. He looked calm, smug. Across from him sat an unnamed federal agent. "You think you found all of us," Marcus said. "You didn't." The agent said nothing. "There's something about that doctor," Marcus continued. "Every time he walks away from death, he makes ripples." Ripples? Like a stone hitting still water. Everyone hears it, especially the ones who were supposed to die. He leaned forward, eyes burning. "There's a network. They're watching Humboldt, not to kill him, to study him. Why? Because if one man can survive that many assassination attempts, then maybe he's not the target. Maybe he's the experiment." The experiment. Ludwig sat in silence after the video ended. The experiment. Was he being tested, measured, used? Kael knocked once on his door, uninvited, and walked in. She saw the flash drive still in the port. "They sent you the footage?" she asked. "You knew?" Knew someone would." She sat across from him. "There's a group," she said. "They don't recruit, they observe. They push people to the brink, soldiers, spies, doctors, as they study how far a person bends before they break. And if I break," Kael smiled grimly, "they bury the results." Date. What comes next? Ludwig stood in the locker room once more, staring at himself in the mirror. The level 5A vest hugged him like a second skin. The scars on his chest ached faintly, like echoes of each bullet, each knife, each narrow escape. He wasn't just wearing the vest for protection anymore. It was a symbol of resistance, of survival, of defiance. Kael stood behind him now, reflected in the mirror. She wore a new ID badge, security consultant. "You're staying?" he asked. "For now. They'll come again. For you, or for me, or both." Ludwig nodded once, then let them. He buttoned up his lab coat, still white, still spotless, still hiding armor beneath, and walked back into the halls of St. Jude. The walk to the garage. It was just past midnight. St. Jude Memorial had quieted. The last of the ER patients were stabilized. Kael had gone off shift. The halls were still. Ludwig walked slowly through the rear exit, coat buttoned, briefcase in hand. The garage, half a block down, that was dimly lit, its upper levels always deserted at this hour. He took the elevator to level 3, where his car sat under a flickering light. And that's when he felt it. That flicker in the back of the mind, that scent of something wrong. He turned. Too late. A van screeched around the corner. 4 masked men in black tactical gear surged out before he could react. He reached for his phone, but a stun baton hit his ribs and dropped him. Darkness swallowed him before the sound of his own groan hit the concrete. XL. Ludwig woke up tied to a metal chair in a cold storage room. The walls were lined with rusted hooks, no windows, one humming fluorescent light above. His coat was still on, his briefcase gone. Then footsteps. 3 figures entered. No masks now. Clean, calm, clinical. The one in front wore a business suit over a vest, tall, shaved head, eyes like polished stone. "We've waited a long time to speak to you," the man said. "But observation has its limits. Now it's time for direct analysis." Ludwig didn't answer. The man gestured. One of the others stepped forward and ripped open his lab coat. The black 5A vest was exposed beneath. "Custom fitted," the man noted. "Rifle rated. Concealed perfectly. We were impressed. We even designed our sedative darts to avoid triggering trauma plates." He circled Ludwig slowly. "But still, you wore it every day, even when you didn't know we were watching." He leaned in. "That tells us something." XLI, Control Group. The man continued. "You've survived 2 shootings, a physical confrontation with Marcus Cross, a knife attack, a targeted hospital infiltration, and still you're here. Why?" Ludwig rasped. "Because we believe you've proven something unique, something human yet aberrant. You resist death not out of luck, but something else." Ludwig grunted. "You're insane." "No, we're scientists." The man stepped back. "And you, doctor, are now our control group." He gestured again. They unbuckled the vest, pulled it off. Ludwig's chest heaved with restrained fury. Vulnerable now, for the first time in years. They hung the vest on a hook above him. The leader spoke again. "You've survived too many variables. We need to know if you can survive without them." He turned to leave. "We'll return in 1 hour. Let's see if you're truly bulletproof without the vest." The door shut and locked. Ex-wife. Adaptation. Ludwig breathed deeply, like pulling the cold air into his lungs, centering himself. No vest, no weapons, no Kael, just concrete, cold steel, and time. But what they underestimated was this. He had adapted. The vest never made him bulletproof. His will did. He began scanning the room, noticing the rusted shelf, the exposed pipe above, the forgotten medical kit in the corner. He rocked the chair, harder, until, snap, one leg broke loose. He crawled to the pipe, loosened the fitting with the broken chair leg, pulled it free. By the time the door unlocked an hour later, Ludwig wasn't sitting anymore. Hex third, still standing. The first man in got hit across the face with the pipe. The second caught a blow to the ribs. Ludwig moved with the clarity of someone who had nothing left to lose. By the time the leader stepped in, gun drawn, Ludwig already had the vest in his hand. "Don't," the man warned. Ludwig stared at him, and then put the vest back on. He didn't run, didn't strike. He simply fastened the last buckle and said, open quote, "I'm not your experiment. I'm your conclusion." Close quote. Then he raised the pipe. Blackout. Two days later, Ludwig was back in his apartment, bruised, stitched, quiet. Kael stood near the window, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "You went dark," she said. "I was taken." She said nothing for a moment. "Vest?" He tapped his chest. "Still mine." Yeah, she let out a breath that almost sounded like relief. He'd escaped, barely. Left 3 unconscious men behind in a storage unit now under federal lock. No signs of who owned the building, scrubbed clean before the authorities arrived. But they made a mistake. They let him live. XLV, the flash drive, part 2. Kael brought him something that night. A second flash drive. "Encrypted," she said. "Took me days to crack." "Where did you get it?" "Marcus Cross's apartment. The FBI missed it. He hid it in a vent." Ludwig hesitated, then inserted it. This time, audio files. Dozens of them. Recordings. Conversations between Marcus and unidentified contacts. One in particular stood out. Open quote, "The doctor keeps wearing it. Perfect. Let him. The longer he stays alive, the more pressure we can apply." "What about extraction?" "Only when he trusts the armor more than himself. That's when he breaks." Close quote. Kael leaned in. "They never wanted to kill you. They wanted to see how far I'd go to stay alive." She nodded grimly. "Now it's your move." XL the 6, the archive. They needed a lead, so Kael took him underground, literally. In the basement of an old logistics company once tied to black market medical shipments, they found it. A rusted server rack, still humming, still live, buried under dust and tarps. The files were encrypted, but Kael worked fast. One folder caught Ludwig's eye. Project Atlas, dozens of profiles, doctors, soldiers, paramedics, pilots. All had survived extreme trauma. All had behavioral tracking files. Some disappeared entirely after being recruited. But one name chilled Ludwig to his core. Open quote, Dr. Eliza Wren, presumed deceased, cardiac arrest during siege 2021. Close quote. Eliza had been his colleague, his friend, his first partner in trauma medicine. She died in a field hospital explosion. But here she was, photographed, logged, dated 2024. Alive. Sev, the return of the ghost. Kael stared at the file. You knew her? She taught me half of what I know. And the other half? She asked. Ludwig's voice dropped. I learned from watching her die. He pulled the printed file and folded it into his coat pocket. She's out there. That means they're not done with me. Kael nodded. But now we're not reacting, we're tracking them. Ludwig strapped on his vest, this time with something new embedded, a locator chip Kael had installed. If they tried to disappear him again, she'd follow. Together, they left the warehouse. This time, not hunted. This time, hunting. Exultate, conclusion, blood and data. Dr. Ludwig Humbolt now knew the truth. He was never just a man in a coat. He was a metric, a file, a result waiting to be recorded. But now he had names, faces, places. Kael walked beside him, just as armored, just as scarred. Together they were two survivors, turned warriors. And from now on, anyone who tried to write the end of his story would find him rewriting it himself. One file at a time, one bullet at a time, one truth at a time. Kael stood over Ludwig's vest, disassembled on a metal table under white light. Wires, circuits, biopads, polymer inserts. Hold still, she said without looking up. Ludwig sat shirtless, arms crossed, watching her work. I thought this was just a vest. It was, Kael replied. Now it's a system. She picked up a sensor the size of a coin and placed it along the interior chest panel. Vitals monitor, tracks your heart rate, oxygen, cortisol levels, and blood pressure. Next, she unsealed a cartridge from a sterilized pouch and slid it behind the trauma plate near his left ribs. Blood detection unit. If you're injured and bleeding, it logs the type, amount, and rate of loss. And if I flatline? Ludwig asked quietly. Kael's eyes flicked to his. It sends an alert to me and uploads everything to a secure satellite. If someone takes you, they'll know you didn't go quietly. Ludwig chuckled dryly. You built a black box for a human. Kael fastened the last sensor. No, I built a parachute for a man falling into hell. L first field test. The alert came 3 days later, a call from a trauma ward in a sister hospital across town. A patient arrived with strange burns, neurological tremors, and signs of exposure to an experimental chemical agent, one not found in any known toxin registry. Ludwig volunteered to assist. Kael protested. Why? She asked. They know your pattern. They bait you. That's why I'm wearing your vest now, he replied. Let them watch. Let's see what they do when we watch them back. She relented and slipped a small tactical relay chip into his vest. Gives me audio, heartbeat, and GPS from 2 miles out. If it cuts off, I move. LI, the toxin. The patient was a man in his late 20s, unconscious, no ID, covered in lesions that shimmered like oil. The staff was baffled. His readings were unstable, high adrenal spikes, fluctuating oxygen saturation. Ludwig adjusted the ventilator, leaned in, and then noticed something no one else had. A faint triangle branded behind the man's ear. He recognized it. The Atlas insignia. They hadn't sent a message. They'd sent a test subject. Suddenly, his vest pinged. A warning tone only Kael could trigger. Heart rate spike, cortisol surge, GPS locked. He wasn't reacting to the patient. He was being scanned. LII. Under watch again, Kael's voice came through his earpiece. Your vitals just jumped. Talk to me. I'm fine. But this patient, they didn't come here by accident. Kael responded immediately. I'm in the building. Keep him alive. I'm sweeping the perimeter. But Ludwig had already moved. He knew what they were doing. If his vest was a system, then someone was trying to breach it remotely. He triggered the manual override Kael had installed, a localized signal jammer that temporarily shut down all wireless transmission except the GPS encrypted audio. A message scrolled across the inner lining of his HUD. Open quote, connection lost, signal interference. Close quote. Kael would see it. She'd know. They were inside the hospital. Again. An open door. He pushed through the hall, heading for the security office. But someone was already waiting, a nurse in scrubs, too tall, too calm, eyes that didn't scan the room, only him. Doctor, the man said, You've dropped your network connection. Ludwig froze. The man smiled. You're not just wearing tech. You're wearing a mirror. Everything you feel, we see. Every pain, every pulse. Kael's voice echoed in Ludwig's ear. Open quote. He's not real staff. I'm coming to you, close quote. The man's hand dipped into his pocket. Ludwig moved faster, grabbed a gurney, slammed it into the imposter, ran. Down the stairs, 2 floors down, into the trauma ward, where Kael was already waiting, her pistol drawn, her voice low. Time to stop playing defense. Breach detected. Kael ripped off the jammer module from the back of Ludwig's vest and held it to the light. Burnt. Short-circuited. Someone bypassed the override, she muttered. Encrypted systems don't just go dead unless they're spoofed or overwritten. Ludwig sat quietly on the trauma ward stretcher, sweat beading on his forehead, pulse elevated. He didn't need the display inside the vest to tell him that. Kael pulled out her tablet and synced it to the vest's internal diagnostics via hardline. Her brow furrowed as cascading lines of code scrolled past. Open quote, system alert, external access detected module 04, biochem scanner. Active module 2, vitals telemetry, active module 01, GPS lock. Active mod digestive monitor, active. Close quote. She froze. Digestive monitor, Ludwig asked, voice low. Kael swallowed. That's not mine. I didn't install that. LV, the depth of exposure. They knew everything. His vitals, how stressed he was if he'd exerted himself when his hands trembled, his location within 2 feet of accuracy down to room number and elevation, his bloodstream, oxygen levels, lactic acid, white blood cell count, even toxins or drugs if he took any. And now, his stomach contents. Ludwig stared ahead, numb. They know if I've eaten. They know if you're hungry, overfed, hypoglycemic, or drugged. They can predict when you'll get tired, weak, angry. Kael pulled the vest fully off and slammed it onto the gurney. I built half this system to protect you, but someone replaced my firmware with theirs. They added micro nanotech without any external seams. This thing's been feeding them everything. She looked at him, and now that you're aware, they'll know that too. LVI, the voice returns. A nearby monitor in the ward, one not even connected to Ludwig's vest, flickered to life. Black screen, green text, then a voice, smooth, digitally altered. Open quote, we thank you. We thank you, Dr. Humboldt. You were the most honest subject we've ever had. Close quote. Kael drew her pistol. Ludwig didn't flinch. The voice continued. Open quote, the stomach monitor was added weeks ago. You slept through it. The override chip, a decoy. The jammer, obsolete. You're in a glass room now, doctor, and we are on the other side of the mirror. Close quote. Ludwig stepped forward, speaking clearly. Why me? A pause. Open quote, because you didn't die, and because you didn't break. We wanted to know what you'd do after the armor stopped being yours. Close quote. Elva 7. Shatter the mirror. Kael pulled the vest apart on the table, one seam at a time. No more subtlety. She dissected it like a surgeon, slicing every internal wire, pulling each sensor, exposing each corrupted module. She found the embedded nanotech chip, no larger than a fingerprint, sealed inside a false trauma plate. Military grade. Untraceable. This was the door, she said. They didn't track your vest. They tracked your biology. She dumped the broken components into a steel tray. Ludwig stared at them. I've been fighting in a house full of windows. Kael looked at him. Then let's burn it down. Elder response. By morning, Ludwig had a plan. He would no longer wear the armor. He would become the weapon. No more digital systems, no more signals, no more implants, trackers, or telemetry. He and Kael built a new rig. Simple, silent, manual only, pure Kevlar and ceramic, no sensors, no wires. The mirror was broken, the window shuttered. But the threat remained. Somewhere out there, Project Atlas now knew everything about him. His reactions, his metabolism, his weaknesses. And if he wanted to live, he'd have to make them forget. The last gift. Dr. Humboldt thought the past was behind him, but Kael knew better. Quiet was temporary. Shadows don't vanish. They just change shape. And she had spent the last 6 months building something just in case. Inside her private lab, beneath an unmarked clinic in Lisbon, she assembled it in silence. A new vest. Not the kind the world had seen before. This one was an armored exoskin, woven with carbon filament thread, ultra-lightweight ceramic plates, and something Kael called SOAR, self-observed layered adaptive response. It adapted to Ludwig's body, his breathing, his pulse, even his emotional states. LX6, unhackable, you said we'd never go back to that. Ludwig whispered when she showed it to him. I said you wouldn't, Kael replied. He ran his fingers over the lining. No seams, no ports, not even a visible stitch. It felt like skin. What if someone tries to tap in? They won't, Kael said. It doesn't transmit. It doesn't receive. No signals, no Wi-Fi, no Bluetooth. Everything is closed loop. She tapped her temple. Only way to read it is with your biometric signature and your touch. Not even I can access it without your body being alive and conscious. Ludwig raised a brow. Dark, Kael. She shrugged. Realistic. Lethseft. Under the coat, a gaze later, Ludwig stood at the mirror. He slipped the new vest over his chest. It wrapped around him like breath. A small light inside pulsed once. Green. He pulled his lab coat on, looked like any other doctor, but now, under that coat, his heart rate was tracked, his blood oxygen monitored, his stress response, injury detection, and digestive state cataloged, and his position mapped only to him. No satellites, just internal gyrolocation relative to last known safe zones. Kael had pre-programmed. If he was injured or drugged, it would know. If he was starving or poisoned, it would react. And if someone tried to take him again, it would notify Kael silently. Leap date. No more glass rooms. Ludwig stepped into the hallway of his new hospital by just another quiet afternoon. But this time he wasn't defenseless. He wasn't broadcasting like a beacon for his enemies. He wasn't naked behind glass walls. He was the fortress now. And no one would breach him again. The Watchtower. Kael converted her Lisbon lab into a remote diagnostics command center. 3 curved displays, 6 biometric graphs, 1 man. Dr. Ludwig Humbolt. Each morning he walked into the hospital. Each night she watched as his vitals danced across the screen. Heart rate, steady. Neural load, balanced. Cortisol levels, marginal rise, typical for high stress. Digestive chemistry, responsive to protein-heavy intake. GPS echo trail, scrambled and stabilized. To anyone else, he looked normal. But Kael knew what patterns meant, and they were starting to shift. The micro variations. It started small. A 0.3% lag in synaptic signal return. A 2-beat variance in resting heart rate when facing south-facing rooms. A sudden spike in subconscious brainwave patterns exactly 3 minutes after his morning shift started. Kael stared at the screen. Something's watching him. But the vest wasn't reacting, and that meant one of 2 things. 1, whatever it was internal. 2, or worse, the mirror was adapting again. She didn't tell Ludwig yet, but she added a layer to the vest's software, an internal anomaly detector capable of flagging even the most subtle divergences in biorhythm. It was time to stop watching his body. Now she would watch his mind. LX6. Self against self. 3 nights later, Kael was sleeping on a cot next to her command desk when the system chirped. Open quote, anomaly detected variance detected in REM state cognitive cycle pattern, looping thought behavior. Origin, subject 0114, subroutine simulate escape, close quote. She shot up, pulled up the dream state telemetry logs. Ludwig's brain had entered a predictive behavior loop, dreaming of escaping containment. Over and over, but he wasn't being held. He was free, or so they thought. Kael whispered, they're not trying to copy him anymore. They're trying to make him doubt reality. The internal breach. The next night, she noticed something even worse. Blood hormone levels began cycling artificially as if triggered by a foreign chemical, but there was no poison, no injection, no trace. Then vitals spiked. Open quote, heart rate 128 BPM, adrenaline surge, critical muscle tension, emergency level, close quote. Kael activated audio. Ludwig, talk to me. His voice crackled through the mic in his collar. I saw myself, he muttered. Kael froze. What do you mean? In the OR window, Ludwig whispered. I looked up and saw someone watching me from the other side of the glass. He was wearing my coat, my face, but he blinked wrong. What do you mean, wrong? No eyelids. LX8, mirror activation. That night, Kael ran a full deep diagnostic of the vest's raw memory banks. What she found chilled her. The mirror program wasn't broadcasting signals. It was embedded, a dormant behavioral virus, planted in the first vest Ludwig ever wore. Some fragment of it had survived in his biology, a biochemical echo, now reawakening. Kael whispered, it's not the AI anymore. It's him. The line between simulation and reality had blurred, and Kael realized something devastating. If the mirror wasn't just tracking him, It was trying to become him. The Purge Protocol. Kael sat in the glow of the diagnostics desk, staring at the code she had once written to protect Ludwig. Code now whispering back to her. The mirror wasn't inside the vest. It was inside the interface, the bridge between the vest and Ludwig's nervous system. Silent, dormant, feeding on his decisions like digital plaque on a neural spine. But Kael had built that interface. She knew where the root kernel was buried. She typed one word into her private terminal, open quote, excise.mode equals true, close quote, then whispered to herself, no more shadows. Vest lockdown, Kael pinged the vest remotely. Open quote, Ludwig, stop moving, you'll feel heat, close quote. Open quote, why, close quote. Open quote, I'm cauterizing something. It won't hurt, but it might feel familiar. Close quote. Ludwig paused, then nodded. His screen pulsed yellow. Inside the vest, a secondary carbon lining contracted, creating a vacuum-sealed sheath between his body and the neural interface. Kael launched Purity Fire, a cleansing protocol that ran a closed-loop reinitialization of the interface's thought-mirroring functions. Open quote, line by line, Kael stripped away echo commands, synthetic dopamine mimicry, recurring predictive response codes, subsynaptic behavioral drift monitors, close quote, and finally, open quote, neural spoof host, deleted, close quote. The vest buzzed once, then the anomaly readings dropped to 0. Kael leaned back in her chair. It was out. LXXE. Ludwig reclaimed for the first time in months. Ludwig could breathe without static on the edge of his thoughts. No whisper, no premonitions, no ghost in the reflection. I feel, he muttered. Kael didn't let him finish. You feel like you. That's what this was all for. She ran a final system scan. Vitals, stable. Neurochemical balance, human. Digestive, you forgot to eat again. She smiled. Ludwig pulled his lab coat closed, the vest humming silently beneath. Untouchable, untampered, and more importantly, unclaimed. The trap that snapped shut, Kael didn't stop there. She used the mirror's last pulse, the final echo from the deletion command, to trace its origin, a frequency resonance lingering like a dying breath. It pointed to a secure satellite relay in the Greenland archipelago. She launched a drone protocol called White Ash, embedded with a virus that mimicked the mirror's old code. When the remnants of Echo tried to interface with it, they swallowed a copy of the cleansing fire and burned from the inside out. Left 3. Silence at last. For the first time in a year, Ludwig didn't sleep with a vest on. He lay on a narrow bed in a quiet house, eyes closed, no dreams chasing him. Kael sat in the next room, sipping coffee, watching a silent monitor. Open quote, Dr. Ludwig Humbolt vitals, normal identity, confirmbo signatures, none. Detected, close quote. She shut the screen off, leaned back in her chair, and said the words she'd been waiting to say for far too long. We're clean. The quiet watch. The war with Echo had ended in code and fire, but Kael didn't sleep. She couldn't. Not while Ludwig still wore the vest, and even more so now that he sometimes didn't, so she kept her terminal connected. Not broadcasting, not tracing, just listening. Each night she monitored from her lab across the ocean, data streaming in from the hidden subroutine Ludwig had allowed her to leave running in the vest's core. It tracked REM sleep cycles, cortisol fluctuations, adrenaline spikes, body temperature rhythms, stomach chemistry changes, muscle micro-twitch readings, dream state drift logs, not for surveillance, but for reassurance. For both of them. LXX Fort, the night pulse at 3:41 a.m. Zurich time, a subtle spike triggered a soft chime. Open quote, subject Dr. L. Humboldt vitals. Elevated REM pattern, interrupted dream state, fragmented recall, stress markers detected. Digestive state, empty, subconscious behavioral flag, threat anticipation, close quote. Kael narrowed her eyes. The vest hadn't detected a breach, no sign of the mirror. Just him. His body still reacting, even months after the neural shadow had been purged. She sighed, then pulled up the psychological overlay. Open quote, recurrent behavioral memory, she muttered. Even the strongest code leaves ghosts. Close quote. LXX at 6, voice in the dark. She tapped into the audio channel, careful not to disturb him. She just wanted to listen. Then she heard him. Open quote. Kael, close quote. His voice groggy. Distant, but clear. She froze. The mic wasn't open. He couldn't hear her. Kael, he said again, are you still there? She whispered into her console even though it was one way. Open quote. Yes, always, close quote. LX7, morning calm. By sunrise, his vitals had returned to baseline. Kael prepared a data summary, but instead of clinical charts, she added a small note which appeared on his vest's internal display when he put it on that morning. Open quote, "You're sleeping deeper each week. The stress patterns are fading, but I'm still here, just in case," close quote. He smiled, reading it in the hospital hallway. Didn't say a word, just pulled the lab coat over the vest and walked on. LXXF8, a living firewall. The vest, once a shield of desperation, had become a living connection, not to machines, but to trust. Kael no longer watched to prevent an attack. She watched to honor the man who kept walking forward, despite everything that tried to break him, even in sleep, even in silence, even in dreams. The hospital was running hot that day. 3 trauma cases had arrived in under an hour, and Ludwig hadn't left the ER wing since sunrise. He moved between rooms with quiet urgency, organizing teams, making decisions, writing orders, listening closely, always listening. But he hadn't eaten. He hadn't sat. He hadn't sipped water in nearly 14 hours, and his body had been warning him for the last 3. Kael saw everything. Open quote, glucose, dangerously low. Sweat profile, cold, damp. Balance algorithm, 73% impaired. Cognitive response delay, 2.1 sec and worsening. Close quote. He was leaning against the wall between rooms now, still trying to dictate case notes into his tablet, his fingers trembling slightly over the keys. Then it happened. His vision turned white, then black. His knees buckled. The fall. The fall. A soft thud echoed down the hallway as Dr. Ludwig Humbolt collapsed. He didn't feel the fall, didn't hear the sound of the med cart hitting the wall beside him, didn't hear the startled nurse shouting his name, but the vest did. Within 0.87 seconds of impact, the Aegis Mech 7th activated emergency protocol, open quote, cause of unconsciousness, hypoglycemic episode. Injection type, glucostim 5, fast-acting synthetic glucose compound. Injection site, subclavian secondary port dose, calibrated to current body mass, metabolic rate, and vitals. Close quote, a tiny hiss of compressed air. The injection was silent. A pulse of warmth surged through his bloodstream. Not painful, but startling. It hit his brainstem like a soft jolt of sunlight. 31 seconds after collapsing, Ludwig's eyes fluttered open. CV. Coming back, blurry ceiling tiles sharpened into focus. There were voices. Nurses hovered above him. A paramedic had already radioed the ER. Someone was taking his pulse, but it was the voice in his vest that cut through it all. The subtle text crawling across the display inside the inner lining of his coat. Open quote. You passed out, Ludwig. You didn't eat. You didn't hydrate. The vest saved you, but I can't keep patching this over forever. You're a human being. Start acting like one. K. Close quote. He blinked again, sat up slowly. Don't move yet, Dr. Humboldt. A nurse urged, but he raised a hand. I'm okay. I know what happened. He felt it now, the energy slowly returning, the haze lifting. Kael had built the vest for gunfire, trauma, sabotage, but this was the first time it had saved him from himself. CVI later that night, in a quiet corner of the hospital, Ludwig sat alone, sipping a bottle of electrolyte water and chewing on a sandwich. He didn't argue with the vest this time, didn't ignore the data, didn't silence the warnings. He simply sat, breathing deeply, the crisp edges of the Aegis Muckert 7 pressing gently into his ribs like an invisible hand on his shoulder. And on a terminal screen halfway across the city, Kael watched his vitals slowly stabilize. She exhaled, then muttered, open quote, maybe now you'll listen. Familiar weight, quiet gratitude. Dr. Ludwig Humboldt had never liked the weight of it, the vest. It had always felt like a burden, a necessary armor, a reminder of the threats that once made their way into sacred hospital halls, a reminder of gunshots and close calls, of breathing shallow under fluorescent lights, wondering if the next patient or visitor might be the last thing he saw. But lately, he'd started to notice something else. The way it subtly tightened when his posture slouched, a nudge to breathe, the faint pressure that anchored him when stress threatened to unmoor his thoughts. The internal warmth that spread through the fabric during cold morning shifts in trauma, and most of all, how it saved his life when he fell. Now, each morning, before stepping out into the chaos of the ER, Ludwig would slip the Aegis Mech 7th under his coat with something he'd never associated with it before. Gratitude. Not obligation. Not fear. Just quiet thanks. Kael's notes. Kael was always working. Not because she had to, but because it mattered. Because he mattered. The logs from the vest's most recent performance were strong, but good wasn't enough. Her lab was littered with components: microchips the size of half a fingernail, new polymer gel cores for the next-gen ballistic mesh. She'd already made a series of small improvements, so subtle Ludwig wouldn't notice, but they were there. Neural load balancing to reduce fatigue on spinal alignment during long hours of wear. Self-calibrating ventilation mesh to quietly regulate temperature under his coat no matter how fast he moved. Micro-EM shielding to further block all known signal hack attempts on medical data. And tonight, she added another module, a quiet, simple one, a soft vibration, like a heartbeat, that would pulse only if the vest detected Ludwig in prolonged silence and stillness during non-sleep hours. Not an alarm, just a whisper. Open quote, "You okay?" Close quote, she uploaded the patch and watched the diagnostics roll in. Open quote, installation, complete, next check-in, 4 hours, subject status, active, stable, tired. Close quote, she smiled. He still won't eat on time, she muttered, but we're working on it. She-icks, a glance in the mirror. It was near midnight when Ludwig finally caught his reflection in the locker room mirror. His coat was off. Just the dark vest remained, hugging close to his frame. Sleek, quietly armored, laced with 1,000 protections no one would ever see. For a long moment, he just looked at himself, not as a doctor, not as a target, but as a man who was still standing, still alive. He placed a hand on the vest's surface, just over his chest, where his heartbeat thumped steadily. And in that moment, he whispered a quiet phrase, not for the vest, but for the person behind it. Open quote. Thanks, Kael. Close quote. He pulled the coat back on and walked out to check on the ICU. Tools and temples. Kael's lab was quieter than Ludwig remembered. All soft lights, organized chaos, and the faint humming of diagnostic equipment running in the background. It smelled faintly of solder, fabric, and warm circuitry. She stood across from him, sleeves rolled up, visor pulled down over her eyes, a toolkit resting on the edge of the reinforced table. He sat perfectly still on a steel stool, upright, arms slightly outstretched, while she worked directly on the vest he still wore beneath his coat, her hands deft and deliberate. Hold still, she said quietly, even though he hadn't moved. I'm a doctor, he replied. I know how to hold still. You're also a terrible patient. There was no venom in it, just truth. Kael leaned in slightly, lifting one of the vest's armored sections. A small panel slid open under her fingers, revealing a set of micro threads and sensors. She replaced 2 of them, made adjustments to a tiny internal lens, and tapped on the small holographic readout hovering beside her. Open quote, vitals, stable. Stomach acidity rising, gastric activity detected, hydration below optimal, blood glucose low normal, close quote. And then, faint sound cut through the silence. Ludwig sighed. Kael's visor slid upward, her eyes meeting his. He didn't even have to say anything. She already had the words loaded. Open quote. You remember what happened last time, right? Close quote. He exhaled through his nose, avoiding her eyes like a scolded child. Open quote. Make me activate the emergency glucose injection again, she said, arching a brow. Because I've upgraded it. The new dose includes a nausea inhibitor, but I made sure it tastes like disappointment. Close quote. He finally chuckled under his breath. Kael wasn't smiling, not fully, but there was a softness at the corners of her eyes. She tapped the screen and brought up a personal note section of his vest's firmware. She typed a message directly into his internal heads-up display. Open quote. You're alive because you wear this vest. But you stay alive because you let it take care of you. That includes eating. That includes resting. Let it help. Let me help. K, close quote. He read it in silence, then glanced at her. I'll eat when we're done. No, she said, picking up a protein bar from the tray beside her. You'll eat while I finish recalibrating the movement sensors. She held it out. He didn't reach for it. She raised her eyebrows higher. With a sigh of resignation, he took the bar and bit into it. Not because he wanted to, but because she was right, as always. An unspoken pact. Kael resumed her work, fingers sliding under the vest's outer layer, tightening small components, applying gentle pressure to test the vest's adaptive fit. Ludwig sat silently, chewing, watching her work. He'd spent years stitching human lives back together, bone, flesh, soul, but the way she stitched together circuits and care was something else entirely. a different kind of surgeon. And she was doing all of it for him. Thank you, he said finally, softly. Kael paused for a moment, then resumed tightening the last magnetic clasp. For the upgrade? She asked, not looking up. For not giving up, he said. She didn't answer right away. Then, with a ghost of a smile, you're my favorite test subject. I'd hate to see the vest get returned in pieces. They both chuckled quietly, a shared understanding woven into the seams of armor, silence, and unspoken concern. Silent signals. Kael's hands moved with surgical precision, small tools rotating and clicking in her fingers as she opened another diagnostic port beneath the vest's second layer. The reinforced fabric flexed slightly with each movement of Ludwig's chest, his steady breath creating the rhythm that guided her focus. Close quote. Another soft, reluctant protest came from somewhere under the vest. Ludwig's stomach, a quiet reminder of his human frailty, of time passing, of meals missed. Kael didn't comment this time. She simply glanced at the readings on her console. Open quote, gastric status empty, digestive enzymes minimal, cortisol elevated, pulse calm, suppressed, close quote. She'd begun to memorize his baselines, not out of necessity, but out of familiarity, out of something else she wasn't yet ready to name. She could tell when he was pushing through pain just by the pattern of microaccelerometer feedback in his shoulders. She could feel through data when he was emotionally off center, not because his heart raced, but because it didn't when it should have. And she could see, right now, that he was worn thin, running on reflex. He hadn't complained once, just like always. Kael paused her adjustments and sat back slightly. The low hum of the lab filled the silence, a calming, neutral white noise. Her gaze lingered on it longer than necessary. Tethered there was something quietly intimate about the vest. Not the armor, but what it let her see. A private window into Ludwig's well-being. His heart, his stress, his needs, sometimes spoken, often not. A heartbeat she monitored from miles away, a digestive system she chided when it growled mid-rounds, a body she protected without ever having to speak. She told herself it was about safety, that it was her duty as the designer. But it was more than that now. This technology, this data, it wasn't just ones and zeros, it was him. She reached for the tactile interface embedded along the vest's left rib panel. It buzzed softly as she adjusted the passive biometric response module. Hey, she said quietly. Ludwig tilted his head slightly toward her, but didn't speak. I added a new feedback note here. She tapped gently under his arm. It'll apply subtle pressure if your glucose dips too low or if you go more than 6 hours without food. His brow lifted slightly. She shrugged. Call it a nudge, a reminder. Your body's whispering, Ludwig. I'm just giving it a louder voice. He smiled faintly, not mocking, not stubborn, just grateful. Signals received. Kael turned back to the console, though her mind lingered behind the screen. Open quote. Why am I doing this? Close quote. She already knew the answer. Because the vest wasn't just about stopping bullets anymore. It was about catching the things he wouldn't let himself feel, the wariness he masked, the pain he buried beneath layers of professionalism and quiet resolve. It let her be there even when he didn't ask, even when he wouldn't. She rested her hand gently on the outer plate once more. It was warm, and beneath it, the rhythm of his heart, steady and strong. Blueprint. Kael wasn't used to distraction, not in her lab, not when she was working. But as Ludwig stood before her, steadily removing his lab coat, then the vest, and finally unbuttoning his white shirt, she felt something shift. He wasn't doing anything out of the ordinary, simply preparing for what she'd requested. A full body scan for the next generation of the protective vest. She needed precise measurements, muscle distribution, temperature gradients, structural tension points. It was all routine, but the man beneath the fabric wasn't. He had the kind of form she hadn't expected. Lean and athletic, the kind of strength earned through necessity, not vanity. Not carved like a model, but solid like a soldier. His skin was clean and pale under the lab lights, muscles subtly defined and symmetrical. Scars here and there, shallow reminders of a dangerous past. Kael cleared her throat and turned quickly to activate the body scanner. Her hand hovered briefly before tapping the interface. Open quote, focus. It's just anatomy, a functional map. That's all. Close quote. She took a slow breath and turned back to him. Arms up, she said, voice steady despite the warmth prickling her neck. He lifted his arms casually, completely comfortable in his own skin. That didn't help. Kael stepped closer, digital caliper in hand. She knelt slightly to measure from his lower rib cage to the crest of his hip. Her fingers brushed against his side. He flinched slightly, just enough for her to notice. Ticklish? She asked, smirking to mask her sudden nervousness. Only a little, he replied. You do this with all your projects? Just the ones that wear combat-rated medical armor and forget to eat, she said without missing a beat. He chuckled. That didn't help either. She took the rest of the measurements, collarbone to sternum, shoulder width, spine length, chest depth, abdomen curvature, all while desperately willing herself not to notice anything beyond the data. But the data lived on a body that was, well, undeniably human, undeniably him. CXX6, Data and Distance. Once the scans were complete, Kael turned back to her console and uploaded the measurements, quickly distracting herself with the data processing. Behind her, she heard him pull his shirt back on, button by button, the quiet sound somehow far too loud. So, he said after a moment, does the new vest come with a full-body armor upgrade, or are you just trying to figure out if I'm symmetrical? Kael smirked, eyes still on the screen. Both. She didn't turn around until the readings were stable. Thanks for your patience, she said, finally looking at him again. He nodded. Of course. Just let me know when you're ready to test the next version. As he walked out, the door hissing shut behind him, Kael let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The scanner continued to hum beside her, replaying his biometric map in holographic projection. All data, all logic. But beneath it, Kael felt the steady drum of something else. Something warm, something personal, something complicated. Measurements. The lab was quiet, save for the occasional beeping of instruments and the soft hum of filtered air through the ceiling vents. Ludwig had removed his shirt again, and this time, without Kael needing to ask twice. There was no ceremony to it. He simply folded the fabric and set it aside as if removing armor for a moment of peace. Mind if I lie down? He asked, voice calm, yet clearly fatigued. Kael looked up from her tablet. Go ahead, you've earned it. He stepped up onto the padded medical table and settled onto his back, arms relaxed at his sides. The soft light above him painted pale lines across the defined curves of his chest and shoulders. Even in rest, his body held tension, the kind built by years of constant motion and quiet resilience. Kael exhaled slowly, barely audible, as she pulled a low stool beside the table. Open quote, focus on the work, close quote. She picked up her scanning tool and started at his collarbone, slowly running it across the muscle and bone structure, cataloging his frame with practiced care. Her fingers brushed lightly over his skin when adjusting the angle. Professional, precise, but internally she was anything but steady. The warmth radiating from him, the rise and fall of his chest, the small imperfections, the faint scars, the slight bruising near his ribs, all made him feel real in a way no data ever could. As she adjusted the scanner, it made a soft chime. Ludwig opened one eye lazily. Everything all right? Yeah, she said, tapping a few buttons. Just adjusting for rib contour. You're symmetrical. Impressive, actually. He gave a faint smile. Never thought being symmetrical would be such high praise. Kael chuckled under her breath. You'd be surprised. It helps with vest calibration. As she continued her measurements, her hand hovered slightly longer near the base of his sternum. She could feel his heartbeat under her fingertips, slow, steady, strong. Then, as she moved to his side, the scanner let out a low tone. Kael raised an eyebrow. What? Your blood sugar's still borderline low, she said, softly. Vest sensors caught it earlier, but I guess now that you're finally still, it's more obvious. I haven't had time to eat, he murmured, eyes closing again. Kael shook her head gently. You say that like it's normal. It is. She didn't argue. Instead, she reached for the small tray on the counter and picked up a glucose packet, silently opening it. Then she leaned down, gently touching his arm. Sit up for a second. He opened his eyes again and obeyed without complaint. Kael handed him the packet. Take this. It'll help. He looked at her, brow raised slightly, but took it and nodded. You're persistent. She gave a soft smile. Someone has to be. As he finished the packet, she quietly resumed her work, moving around him, taking her final measurements. But she couldn't help it now. Her gaze occasionally lingered, the strength in his shoulders, the slope of his neck, the lines that only years of service and discipline could shape. Open quote, he's not just a patient. Close quote, he was Ludwig. And Kael was starting to realize how deeply she had let herself care, not just for his vitals, not just for the data pulsing through the vest's interface, but for him. The reminder in his pocket. A week had passed since Ludwig opened up to Kael about his quiet vulnerability. Since then, Kael had been unusually focused, not in her usual analytical way, but with a quieter, more deliberate intention behind her work. One late evening in her lab, bathed in the soft glow of blue monitors and warm backlighting, Kael set the final piece of her newest invention on the workbench. It was small, sleek, and almost unnoticeable, about the size of a thumb drive, matte black with a subtle brushed metal trim. She pressed a button on the side. Vitals link established, the device chimed softly, connected to Dr. Ludwig Humbolt. Kael allowed herself a satisfied smile. The next morning, as Ludwig adjusted his collar in his office before rounds, Kael stepped in holding a small black case. She waited until he noticed her, then held it out without a word. He raised an eyebrow. Is this for me? Kael nodded. A gift, of sorts. He opened the case and found the device nestled inside. It looked like something simple, minimalistic, not flashy. Very much his style. It's a passive companion to the vest, she explained. You can keep it in your pocket. It links directly to me and the vest's internal readings. Ludwig glanced up at her, curious. What does it do? It gives me a way to send you discreet messages, she said, like reminders when your stomach's been empty too long, or if your heart rate gets erratic, or even if you've been standing for too many hours without a break. He chuckled softly. You're really looking out for me, aren't you? Kael shrugged, trying to keep her tone casual. Somebody has to. You're not very good at doing it yourself. He tilted his head, the faintest smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. And you'll be the voice in my pocket now? She gave a small nod. Only when it matters, and only when you need it. He held up the device, inspecting it. It won't vibrate or make noise in front of patients? No, Kael assured him. It's subtle, a brief pulse you'll feel, just enough to catch your attention. You press the button once to acknowledge the message, twice to dismiss, and you can disable it entirely if you want. Ludwig didn't answer right away. He simply slipped it into the inner pocket of his coat, close to where the vest rested against his chest. I won't turn it off, he said after a moment. Kael allowed herself a rare smile. Good. Later that afternoon, deep into a stretch of nonstop patient consults, Ludwig was in the middle of reviewing a chart when he felt it, a soft pulse against his ribs. He glanced down and reached into his coat pocket. The device's small interface glowed faintly, displaying just a short message. Stomach empty. Coffee only. Consider food soon. He couldn't help but smile. He pressed the button once, message acknowledged, and quietly turned to finish his notes. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like the burden of caring was entirely his to carry, and he didn't feel alone. Critical link. The hospital night shift was often quiet, until it wasn't. The silence of the hallways had become routine to Dr. Ludwig Humboldt, a soft hum broken only by distant monitors and the occasional squeak of rubber soles. But tonight, something changed, subtly at first. As Ludwig checked in on a recovering patient in the cardiac unit, a faint vibration ticked at his side. The device Kael built rarely buzzed twice within minutes unless something unusual was happening. He reached into his coat pocket and glanced at the small screen. Stress hormone spike. Heart rate rising. Are you okay? He frowned. Was he stressed? He didn't feel it, but the data said otherwise. His hands were steady, breath even. But Kael's tech picked up the shifts before he noticed them. Then another alert came through, seconds later. Location signal distorted. Possible interference? Ludwig froze. Interference? In the hospital? His thoughts went still. He looked around the dimly lit hallway. The lights flickered once quickly. No one else seemed to notice. But the small red indicator on his device pulsed again. Vital signature scan mismatch in nearby patient room. That wasn't normal. Kael's system had begun doing passive environmental scans to identify anomalies. He had allowed it, mostly as a trial, and now it found something. Back in her lab, Kael's eyes widened. The readings weren't a malfunction, they were accurate. Someone in the hospital had spoofed the vital signature of a patient, not a medical emergency, a breach. Her fingers flew over the keys. Ludwig, you need to leave the corridor. Now, she sent through the device. Before he could move, the door to the room beside him opened. Out stepped a man in scrubs. Clean, professional, but something was wrong. Ludwig couldn't name it, just a feeling, a flicker behind the eyes, a stillness in posture that didn't belong to someone exhausted from rounds. The man looked at him, smiled. You should really take better care of yourself, Dr. Humboldt. Ludwig's pulse surged, and the device picked it up instantly. His vest, long hidden under his coat, activated a low-level defense mode, monitoring heart rate, muscle tension, reflex acceleration. Kael's voice came through his earpiece this time, low, calm. Your vitals just spiked. Don't engage. Move to the east stairwell. Now. But the man in scrubs was already stepping forward. I've been waiting to see how close I could get to you. The vest is impressive. I'll give your partner that. But it only helps if she sees the threat in time. Kael was already scanning hospital feeds, rerouting hallway lights, sending silent alerts to security. She watched the doctor's vitals climb, adrenaline flooding his system, but he stayed calm, composed. Her voice returned to him. 4 steps to your left, emergency panel. Pull it. Without hesitation, Ludwig moved. The panel opened, a security door on just long enough to slip through. Lock, seal, silence. Silent. He breathed hard. The man hadn't followed, yet. But Kael was already tracking him, tagging him in the hospital system, alerting internal security, and quietly scrubbing footage to buy time. You okay? She finally asked, through the speaker in his collar. Ludwig nodded, still catching his breath. Yeah, thanks to you. Don't thank me yet, Kael muttered. Let's finish this. Ghost in the halls. The soft click of the reinforced door sealing shut echoed like a gunshot in the quiet corridor. Ludwig leaned back against the cold wall, his breath heavy, heart pounding. Through his collar, Kael's voice came again. Steady, focused, the way she always sounded when she was deeply engaged. He's bypassed 2 of the hallway cameras. He's trained, but not a ghost. I'm rerouting power to corridor sensors. You've got 20 seconds before he finds another way around. Ludwig nodded, straightened his coat, and pulled the small handheld device from his pocket. The screen flickered with real-time readings, his vitals, his surroundings, and Kael's messages flashing in short bursts. Back in the lab, Kael's hands moved across the holographic interface in front of her. She had tapped into the hospital's backup generator, rerouted its motion sensor grid, and locked the lift system to contain the intruder in one of the lower wings. But it was the doctor's readings that she kept glancing back to, especially his heart rate. 81, stable. She exhaled. You'll need to get to the western stairwell. I've blacked out the floor plan he's using. He'll think you're still in Hall C. Ludwig moved quickly, steps silent, precise. Despite the tension, he looked composed, but Kael could still hear his breath. Through the vest's subtle sensors, she could hear everything. The rhythm of his lungs, the faint churn of his stomach, even the muted thump of his heart under the advanced fabric. She had grown used to these sounds, almost comforted by them. He reached the stairwell and paused. Something flickered on the handheld. Unknown signal nearby. Kael saw it too. Oh no, she whispered. He has a frequency scanner. He's trying to hijack the vest signal. Ludwig froze. Can he? Not if I move faster. Her fingers danced across her terminal. She isolated the frequency, shifted the encryption key in real time, and layered in a false reading. On the intruder scanner, the doctor was suddenly 2 floors below. Move, Kael whispered. Ludwig burst through the stairwell door, weaving between carts and empty gurneys. Behind him, the stairwell lights flickered. Kael's doing. A delay tactic. She sent another message. West exit open, garage level, vehicle ID 6742B. You started my car? He said aloud, breathless. Of course. I'm not letting him get near you again. Within minutes, he burst into the garage. The car door was already open. He slid into the seat, peeled off his lab coat, and slammed the door shut. As the engine roared to life, his screen buzzed. Escape route set, traffic green. Kael's voice came softer this time. Your vitals are elevated, your stomach's stressed, you need food. Ludwig gave a tired chuckle as the car sped away from the hospital. I'll stop at the diner, I promise. Real food, she added. Not coffee. No promises there. As the doctor disappeared into the city night, Kael sat back in her chair, staring at the final vital readout for the evening. Rate. Even. Safe. She leaned forward and whispered, even though he couldn't hear her anymore. Stay that way. The silent partnership. The night was quiet when Ludwig finally stepped into his apartment, fatigue hanging heavy over his body like the lab coat he'd just tossed over a chair. The lights flickered on with a soft hum. He glanced down at the small device Kael had made, still cradled in his palm. It had gone silent now, except for a single glowing line across the screen. Status, monitoring continues. He sighed, half smiling. I know, he muttered softly. I still haven't eaten. Across the city, Kael sat in her lab, her workstation bathed in a cool blue light. Ludwig's vitals were steady, his heart rate low, breathing calm, but his blood sugar was dipping again. Her concern itched at the edge of her mind like static. She opened a private message channel and typed, open quote, "You're low on fuel again. Please, even toast is better than nothing." Close quote. A few seconds later, his reply blinked on her screen. Open quote. Making toast. You win. She leaned back, amused but also relieved. Kael had grown used to the quiet signs of his health, the rise and fall of his chest when he slept, the way his stomach always responded to coffee before food, the faint creaks of tension in his shoulders when he hadn't sat down all day. And now, after all this time, those readings weren't just data, they were him. CXL-A. Echoes in the circuitry. The next morning, Ludwig returned to the hospital refreshed, toast consumed, coffee in hand, and the vest, Kael's upgraded model, snug beneath his shirt and coat. The small device in his pocket chimed gently. Breakfast confirmed. Well done. He shook his head, amused. Are you always watching? He whispered under his breath as he walked through the lobby. Kael's voice came through his earpiece. You say that like it's a bad thing. He paused, smirking. It depends. Are you monitoring my posture now, too? I could. Want me to? Absolutely not. They laughed together, quietly, like old friends, like something deeper neither had spoken aloud. As the day wore on, Kael watched from her lab, studying not just his vitals, but his patterns, his pauses, his speech, the way his body responded to stress. Her readings had become intuitive. She could now sense a drop in mood from the rhythm of his heartbeat. She could tell when his stomach tightened with anxiety, even if he said nothing. And when it gurgled faintly after coffee, she noted the timing again, fascinated, respectfully curious. Each echo in his digestive system after coffee told her something. How fast it processed liquids, how sensitive it was to timing, how he reacted when it was the only thing in his stomach. It was information, yes, but it was also connection. CX6, the subtle signal that afternoon as Ludwig stood beside a patient's bed, offering comfort to a family in the ICU, the device in his pocket vibrated once. He glanced at it. Hydration low, 6+ hours without water. He smiled gently, nodded to himself, and, when the moment allowed, stepped into a break room and poured a glass. Kael, watching the notification from her lab, felt a soft warmth in her chest. It wasn't just the success of her design, it was the feeling of truly taking care of someone who had always put others first. She opened the microphone briefly. Thank you. He blinked. For what? For letting me care back. Ludwig said nothing for a moment. Then, with a quiet breath, he replied, I trust you, Kael. And in her lab, surrounded by technology, screens, and data, Kael closed her eyes and smiled. Deviation. It was early evening when Kael noticed it. She had been at her workstation, sipping tea that had long gone cold, her eyes scanning the steady data flowing in from Ludwig's vest. At first, everything appeared normal. But then came a subtle deviation. Barely enough for an alarm, not enough to trigger the device in his pocket, but Kael noticed. The rhythm of his breathing had changed, just slightly more shallow, just slightly more uneven, and the baseline electrical activity from his gut, usually quiet but consistent, was beginning to slow. She leaned in, brow furrowed. Her hand hovered over the comm. Ludwig, she said softly into her mic. No answer. She pinged the device, still nothing. Not a warning level signal. No danger. Just absence. The silence between Ludwig, meanwhile, was sitting quietly on the rooftop garden just above the recovery wing. A rare place of calm in the middle of the hospital. His elbows were on his knees, coat folded beside him, and the city lights blinked in the distance like 1,000 quiet signals. He wasn't in pain, not physically, but there was a weight in his chest that had nothing to do with organs or medicine. It was the anniversary. No one knew except perhaps Kael, though he never said it aloud. Still, she always seemed to sense something different about this time of year. His fingers brushed against the device in his pocket. It hadn't buzzed lately, and he hadn't responded to her soft voice in the comm either. Not because he didn't want to, just because he wasn't ready to be seen. Not yet. In the lab, Kael stared at the stillness in his readings. No alarms, but too quiet. She opened a private message and typed, open quote, Kael, you don't have to say anything. I'm just here. If you need me, close quote. She didn't hit send right away. She waited, then typed something else instead. I noticed your breathing slowed and your stomach went quiet. That usually means something's on your mind. No judgment, just care. Close quote. Then she sent it. Returning signal. A few minutes passed before her terminal pinged with a reply. Open quote, I didn't eat. Couldn't. I just needed quiet. Close quote. Kael exhaled softly, her shoulders relaxing. She replied, I understand. Just promise me something. What? That you'll let me listen, even when it's quiet. Close quote. There was a long pause before his reply came. Open you already do. Close quote. In that moment, the data on her screen shifted. His breathing steadied, his pulse fell into rhythm, and deep within the stream of vitals, Kael heard it. The gentle restart of his stomach. A quiet, soft sound. Not because of food, but because he was okay again. The flicker in the data. The next day began like any other. Morning vitals, steady. Hydration, good. Breakfast, confirmed. Kael was midway through logging calibration updates when one of the side monitors pinged. Not an alarm, just a soft notification. She frowned and opened the feed. Heart rate variance, 14% above baseline, not matching activities. It was subtle, but it wasn't nothing. Ludwig wasn't moving quickly, he wasn't under visible stress, and yet his cardiovascular readings had a jitter in them, an irregular flicker that came and went in short bursts. She checked the respiratory data. Digestive activity was steady too. Nothing to suggest illness, but this heart rhythm, it was off. She sighed. The check-in Kael pressed the comm. Ludwig, talk to me. How are you feeling right now? His voice came back steady with a faint hum of background noise. He was walking a hallway. I feel fine. Why? Your heart rate's showing some variation that doesn't match what you're doing. No dizziness, no shortness of breath. None, he said simply. She hesitated. Chest tightness? No. Then, after a pause, Kael, you're worried. CLX2, the decision. I'm cautious, she corrected. I want you to stop where you are, just for 2 minutes. Let me run a deeper scan. Ludwig chuckled quietly. You make it sound like I'm a patient. You are, she said softly. You just happen to wear a lab coat. He stopped walking. The vest's advanced sensors began their deeper read. Electrical conduction, microfluctuations in cardiac rhythm, oxygen exchange. The result made her sit up straighter. Not dangerous. Not yet. But an early sign of something that needed attention before it could be. The unavoidable truth. Ludwig, she said, her tone firmer now. I need you in cardiology for an EKG today. Kael, no arguments. You know I wouldn't push if it wasn't important. There was a pause. Then with quiet acceptance, he replied, all right, I trust you. She sat back, watching the readings settle as he changed direction toward the cardiology wing. And in that moment, Kael realized the very thing she had built to save him from sudden danger might just save him from something slow, silent, and far more insidious. The shift in routine. The arrhythmia diagnosis didn't knock Ludwig off his feet, but it did change his pace. Not all at once, but in small, deliberate steps. He started taking the extra minute to drink water before his first coffee. He made a point of grabbing a proper meal before late afternoon rounds. And, though he'd never admitted outright, he began to pay more attention to the device in his pocket and the subtle hum of the vest beneath his lab coat. Kael noticed. She always noticed. TLX9. A new layer of listening. Back in her lab, Kael rewrote sections of the vest's internal software. The cardiac monitoring became more granular, analyzing not only rhythm but patterns in response to stress, caffeine, fatigue, and even emotional spikes. She didn't tell Ludwig every detail. She didn't need to. What mattered was that the vest would now flag early indicators before even she could hear them in the data. And quietly, she added another protocol, a private alert system for herself, in case his readings strayed too far. That one wouldn't ping Ludwig unless absolutely necessary. CLXXX, the check-in without asking. One morning, during a busy surgical prep, Ludwig's vest sent a small chime to Kael's console. Not an alarm, just a subtle nudge. Slow, slow, possible early. She didn't speak into the comm. She knew he had his hands full, but she sent a message to his pocket device. Open quote, drink some water before you scrub in, close quote. He read it between steps in the prep and reached for the water bottle on the counter without thinking, hekine. More than data. Later that day, Ludwig stood alone in the physician's lounge, coat unbuttoned, vest visible. He touched the edge of the fabric, thinking of all the times it had stopped a bullet, caught a subtle warning, or quietly reminded him to care for himself. Then he pressed the comm. Kael, I've been meaning to ask. Do you monitor all your projects like this? Her voice came through, warm and steady. Only the ones I can't afford to lose. Ludwig didn't reply right away, but as his heart rate steadied on her screen, Kael could tell he understood exactly what she meant. The unseen trigger. Ludwig's pulse was elevated, his body responding as if danger were close, but there was nothing. The hallway was empty, sterile, and silent except for the hum of the lights. He pressed a hand against his chest, feeling the steady weight of the vest beneath his lab coat. The small device in his pocket glowed again. Alert. Elevated adrenal response. Kael, he whispered into the comm, I don't see anything. Her voice came back, low but steady. Your body does. Something's triggering this, and your readings aren't lying. Stay alert. CLX6, echoes of the past. Ludwig took a slow breath, scanning the hallway again. His mind flickered back to the shooting years ago, the sound of the gun, the crack of the bullet hitting his vest. His body remembered even if he tried not to. Was this a phantom response? A memory embedded so deep that the body reacted before the mind? Or was there really someone nearby watching him? Kael's monitors told her more than words could. Your adrenaline surge isn't random, she murmured. There's a pattern here. I think your body is picking up something environmental. Seychelles 7. The ripple, then. A sound. Barely audible. The creak of a door hinge further down the corridor. Ludwig's head snapped toward it. His vitals spiked on Kael's display. You heard that? He asked. Yes, she replied. North wing, 2 doors down. I'm tagging it now. A red outline blinked onto her console, marking the hallway map. Ludwig moved carefully, his footsteps controlled, his hand brushing the edge of the vest beneath his coat. He didn't know what he'd find, but he knew he wasn't alone. Ludwig approached the source of the sound, each step steady but deliberate. His coat shifted with his movement, the faint outline of the vest pressing against the fabric. The door ahead was slightly ajar, shadows spilling into the hall. The device in his pocket vibrated once more. Kael's voice came through, softer than usual. I've got you, Ludwig. Whatever's there, I'll see it when you do. The unexpected presence. He pressed his hand to the door and pushed gently. The hinges groaned again, and the door swung open into a dim, patient room. At first glance, there was no intruder, no masked figure, just the soft glow of monitors, the steady hum of medical equipment, and a patient asleep in bed. But then, movement. A figure stood at the far corner, half hidden in the shadows, not armed, not threatening, just watching. The man stepped forward slowly, and Ludwig realized with a jolt. It wasn't a stranger. It was someone he recognized. CXC. The past returns. Kael's voice cut in. Vitals spike. What do you see? Ludwig's throat felt tight. It's someone I know. The figure stepped fully into the light. His face was pale, marked with old scars, his eyes fixed on Ludwig with unsettling calm. Dr. Humbolt, the man said, his voice low. It's been a long time. CXCI, Kael's alarm. Back in her lab, Kael's console lit up with a new set of alerts. The man's body registered on the vest's secondary sensors as soon as Ludwig came within range. Elevated stress markers, adrenaline spikes not matching a patient's rest. Whoever this was, he wasn't here by accident. Kael spoke urgently into the comm. Ludwig, get out of there. He's not supposed to be here. The man in the room smiled faintly, as if hearing her words through Ludwig. Your guardian can't help you forever. The scarred man. The silence stretched, broken only by the soft beep of the patient's heart monitor. Ludwig didn't move. The scarred man didn't blink. Finally, Ludwig's voice cut through the tension. What are you doing here? This is a hospital, not. The man tilted his head, a humorless smile forming. Not what? Not a battlefield? Not a hunting ground? You, of all people, should know danger doesn't care where it strikes. Ludwig's pulse spiked again, the vest recording every tremor, every heartbeat. Kael's voice whispered urgently in his ear. Your vitals are unstable. Step back, Ludwig. Now. X3. The warning. The scarred man took a step closer, out of the corner shadows. His eyes burned with something Ludwig couldn't place. Not madness, not hatred, something sharper. They all think you're untouchable, he said. Dr. Humbolt, the man who wears armor under his coat, the man who cheats death in the hallways, but I know better. Everyone breaks, even you. Kael's console flared red with his words. The vest had detected his adrenaline spike, too. He wasn't calm. He was wound like a spring. Who sent you? Ludwig asked, his voice firm despite the tension. The man's smile widened. You already know. Kael's intervention. Back in her lab, Kael was already working, hacking into the hospital's surveillance system, overlaying her own feeds with Ludwig's biometric data. She pulled up the corridor camera, isolating the scarred man's image. Her stomach dropped. She knew that face. She had seen it before, in the background of an old threat report she'd flagged months ago. An organized cell that had targeted officials and first responders. She spoke quickly, her voice low but sharp. Ludwig, listen to me. He's not acting alone. He's testing you, and he's not the only one here. CXCV. The trap tighten's Ludwig's eyes narrowed. He didn't show it, but he felt the weight of Kael's words. The scarred man seemed to sense it too. You should check your pocket, doctor. She already knows what you'll find. The device in Ludwig's coat buzzed violently, its glow pulsing in warning. The mobile sitchers detected. Infiltration. The hairs on the back of his neck rose. This wasn't a conversation. It was a setup. And the hospital was about to become a battlefield again. First move. The device in Ludwig's pocket pulsed faster, glowing red. Alert, 3 additional signatures. Ludwig's eyes flicked to the doorway. Shadows moved at the far end of the corridor. More figures, masked and silent, slipping into the hospital like ghosts. The scarred man tilted his head, amused. You see? You're not the hunter here. You're the bait. X swam. Kael takes control back in her lab. Kael's fingers flew over her console. She cut into the hospital's security feed, locking down doors and rerouting hall lights. Panels flickered, plunging parts of the corridor into darkness while forcing bright light onto the intruders. Ludwig, she said firmly into the comm, stay by the doorway. Do not move into the open. I'll choke their path. His heart rate was spiking. She could see it, but his voice stayed calm. Kael, there are patients here. I know, she said, which is why we stopped them now. 6th-8. The clash in the corridor. The first masked figure advanced, a blade glinting faintly under the fluorescent lights. Ludwig stepped back into the patient's room, keeping his body between the intruder and the sleeping patient. His vest pressed hard against his ribs with every breath. The man lunged. The blade struck, sparks flying as it scraped against the vest beneath Ludwig's coat. The impact sent him stumbling back, but the vest held. Kael's voice cut in immediately. Impact detected, non-penetrating, you're clear. Ludwig shoved the attacker away, slamming the door shut, but more shadows pressed against the frosted glass panel. CX. Kael's counterstrike. Kael rerouted the hospital's internal alarms. Red strobes lit up the hall, sirens blaring. But she didn't stop there. She tapped into the vest's hidden functions, a failsafe she had never used until now. On Ludwig's HUD device, a new message blinked. Engage protective mode, external audio feed linked. Suddenly, Kael's voice wasn't just in his ear, it boomed through the corridor speakers. Security en route. Leave the building now, or you won't leave at all. The intruders hesitated, their shadows wavering. CC, the standoff. Inside the patient's room, Ludwig tightened his grip on the door handle, his heart hammered. The vest throbbed with each impact of his pulse, reminding him he wasn't alone. The scarred man, however, only smiled. This isn't over, Doctor. She can shield you for only so long, but when she falters, when you falter, we'll be waiting. He backed toward the corridor, merging with the retreating figures. Within moments, the shadows melted into the flashing lights, gone as quickly as they had appeared. The sirens echoed down the hall. Kael's voice came softer now, trembling slightly despite her usual control. Ludwig, are you hurt? He breathed out slowly, staring at the door. No, thanks to you. But this wasn't just a threat, Kael. This was a warning. CC, aftermath in the corridor. The alarm still pulsed faintly in the hospital hallways as security swarmed the building, but by the time they arrived, the intruders had melted into the night. The scarred man's words hung in Ludwig's mind like a splinter. Everyone breaks, even you. Ludwig stood in the doorway of the patient's room, his hand still on the frame. The sleeping patient hadn't stirred, shielded from the chaos by his presence. He exhaled slowly, trying to quiet the thrum of adrenaline in his veins. Kael's voice returned, softer now. Vitals stabilizing, you're safe, but Ludwig, this wasn't random. They knew where to find you. CCI. The debrief later, in his office, Ludwig sat with his lab coat folded neatly beside him, the vest still strapped firmly to his chest. Kael patched into his monitor feed, her face appearing on screen, illuminated by the glow of her lab. She wasted no time. I ran his face through my archives. The scarred man is connected to the same group that's been watching you since the first shooting. They've grown more organized. Ludwig leaned back in his chair, rubbing a hand across his jaw. So this wasn't about the hospital. It was about me. Kael nodded. You're the target. And tonight, they wanted to remind you of that. CCII, the question of limits. The room fell silent. Ludwig could hear the faint hum of his vest sensors still monitoring him in real time. The irony wasn't lost on him. A doctor surrounded by machines, his own body reduced to readings on a screen. Finally, he spoke. What if he's right, Kael? What if they find the moment when you can't get to me in time? Kael's gaze didn't waver. Then I'll make sure that moment never comes. CCRA, the next step. But even as she said it, Kael knew the truth. They had reached the edge of what the current vest, even her most advanced design, could provide. If the threat was evolving, so must they. She leaned closer to the screen. Ludwig, I need to build something new, stronger, smarter, something they can't predict. Ludwig studied her for a moment, then nodded. Do it, because after tonight, I don't think they're going to stop. CCIV, Blueprints of Tomorrow. Kael stayed on the screen long after the hospital around Ludwig had quieted for the night. Her lab was alive with light, blueprints sprawled across multiple monitors, schematics rotating in holographic overlays. She wasn't just talking theory, she was already designing. This vest has kept you alive through bullets, knives, even sabotage, she explained, her voice steady but urgent. But now, they're adapting. We need more than protection. We need prediction. Ludwig leaned forward, studying the renderings on her screen. Layers of composite armor, microsensors, embedded AI modules. It looked less like body armor and more like a second skin. And you think this will keep me ahead of them? He asked quietly. Kael nodded. Not just ahead, untouchable. CCV, the weight of trust. Ludwig's hand brushed unconsciously against the current vest beneath his shirt. For years, it had been a symbol of survival, of vigilance, of Kael's unseen guardianship. But now she was asking him to trade that familiar shield for something even more advanced, something that would bind their trust even closer. He studied her face on the monitor. You've already saved my life more times than I can count, Kael. But this, he gestured toward the schematics, this feels like crossing a line, more machine than man. Her gaze softened. No, Ludwig, it's not about replacing you. It's about preserving you. The shadow network. Even as Kael worked, she couldn't shake the scarred man's words. This wasn't an isolated attack. He had spoken with the confidence of someone backed by an organization, a network that had the resources to track Ludwig inside his own hospital. She tapped a command, overlaying her design schematics with security footage and intercepted chatter from encrypted channels she had been monitoring for months. And there it was, a code name, Project Hollow. Her pulse quickened. Whoever these people were, they weren't just hunting Ludwig. They were building something of their own. Cece Tsaif, Resolution. Back in his office, Ludwig stood and buttoned his lab coat over the vest once more. He glanced at the dark hallway outside, then back at Kael's face on the screen. Then we don't wait, he said. If they're building something, we build faster, stronger, better. Kael allowed herself the smallest smile. Then let's begin. And as the night deepened, the two of them, doctor and engineer, guardian and watchman, prepared for the battles yet to come. CC 8th, Kael's new blueprint. In her lab, Kael worked tirelessly, pulling late hours with only the hum of her equipment for company. The design she was building went far beyond armor. It was a system. Layers of ballistic material interwoven with smart fibers, biometric sensors, fused with predictive AI modules. For the first time, the vest wouldn't just react to Ludwig's body and environment, it would anticipate. She muttered to herself as code scrolled across one monitor. Predictive stress mapping, early arrhythmia alerts, automatic adrenaline countermeasures. Every new line of code, every new sensor tested, she thought of him, the man walking hospital halls with the weight of danger always just behind him. CCIX. At the hospital, meanwhile, Ludwig carried out his work as usual. To his patients, nothing had changed. He moved from room to room, offering reassurance, explaining treatments, listening with calm authority. But when he passed through the corridors, he couldn't shake the memory of the scarred man. He found himself glancing at doorways, listening for unusual footsteps, watching the reflections in the polished floor. And always, the faint glow from his pocket reminded him that Kael was watching too. Tesh CCX. Threads in the dark. That night, Kael found something that made her blood run cold. Her data scans on Project Hollow turned up a fragment of intercepted comms, phrases stitched together from chatter on a dark network. The doctor with the vest. Break the Guardian, break him. They weren't just after Ludwig's body, they were after his connection to her. If they couldn't kill him outright, they would try to sever the one line of defense that kept him alive. CCXI. A conversation unspoken. Kael connected to Ludwig's device as he finished a long shift. His vitals showed exhaustion, slow steps, heavy breathing, hunger setting in after hours without food. Ludwig, she said quietly, we need to talk. He unbuttoned his coat slightly, loosening the vest beneath, and sank into his office chair. If this is about the new design, I trust you. Build what you have to build. It's not just that. She hesitated, her voice softer now. They're not only targeting you anymore, they're targeting me, the bond between us. Ludwig's eyes hardened. Then we don't give them what they want. We don't break. CC Swev. Prototype. 3 nights later, Kael called Ludwig back into her lab. The room was alive with light, glowing screens, the hum of servers, the soft click of tools against metal. At the center stood something new, a vest unlike any Ludwig had ever seen. Sleek, layered, thinner than his current armor, but somehow more formidable. Fibers shimmered faintly where light touched them, and beneath the fabric, small nodules pulsed with a steady rhythm, like an artificial heartbeat. Kael stood beside it, arms crossed, her eyes glowing with determination. This isn't just armor anymore, she said. It's awareness. It reads your body, your environment, even predictive stress triggers. If danger is coming, it will know before you do. Ludwig approached slowly, his hand brushing against the material. It feels alive. Kael nodded, because in a way, it is. Hollow echoes. While Kael showed Ludwig the prototype, the scarred man stood in a darkened warehouse miles away, lit only by the glow of his phone. Across its cracked screen scrolled grainy surveillance footage. Ludwig in the hospital, Ludwig with his patients, Ludwig walking the halls, and finally a still frame of Kael in her lab projected across the wall. They rely on each other, the scarred man said to the figures surrounding him. Break one, the other will fall. From the shadows, a voice answered. Then it's time we reach into the hollow. CC of 14. The trial back in Kael's lab, Ludwig slipped on the new vest. It fit snugly, molding to his frame as if it had always belonged there. The sensors activated instantly, syncing with his heartbeat, his breath, the subtle workings of his body. Kael watched the data stream across her console. Heart rhythm stable, muscular tension mapped, digestive patterns logged, predictive stress response already calibrating. How does it feel? She asked quietly. Ludwig flexed his arms, shifted his stance, then let out a low breath. Like it's listening. Kael allowed herself a small smile. That's because it is. And as long as it listens, I'll be listening too. It had been a long shift. Ludwig had left his vest in his office, folded neatly beside his lab coat while he changed into fresh scrubs. For once, he allowed himself the rare moment of feeling unarmored. Just a man, just a doctor. But that moment was exactly what his enemies had been waiting for. 6. The ambush. As Ludwig stepped into a quiet side hallway, a man emerged from the shadows. He wasn't masked this time, just a stranger blending into the crowd until he pulled a pistol from under his jacket. "Dr. Humboldt," he said with a grim smile, "without your little vest, you're nothing." The gun raised. Time slowed. CCX theft. The shot. The blast echoed through the sterile corridor. Patients cried out from nearby rooms. The force hit Ludwig square in the chest, but there was no vest this time, no shield of Kevlar to catch the round. He staggered backward, breath ripped from his lungs, the world tilting as he clutched at the spreading warmth on his shirt. In Kael's lab, alarms erupted. Signal loss, critical impact detected. Her hands froze on the console. No, he wasn't wearing it. CC8. The fall, Ludwig dropped to one knee, his breath ragged. The attacker loomed closer, pistol still aimed, ready to finish the job. But what the man hadn't planned on was the device Ludwig still carried in his pocket. Even without the vest, Kael's link to him was active. Her voice burst through the corridor speakers, sharper than steel. "Security breach. South wing. Armed assailant." The gunman cursed, glancing toward the sound. And Ludwig, even through the haze of pain, found one last surge of strength. The edge of darkness. The sterile hallway tilted and blurred as Ludwig fell to his knees, one hand pressed weakly against his chest. Warmth spread beneath his palm, his breath shallow and ragged. His vision flickered, the overhead lights splitting into shards, shadows stretching long across the corridor. He could hear his heartbeat in his ears, uneven, faltering, each pulse weaker than the last. Somewhere far away, alarms blared, footsteps echoed, voices, but he couldn't make them out. CCXX. Kael's voice through the haze, a sound cut a siren. Not a shout, a voice. "Ludwig, stay with me. Do you hear me? Stay with me." Kael's voice, sharper than the ringing in his ears, steady against the pull of darkness. The device in his pocket pulsed faintly, syncing with her words. She could see everything, his collapsing vitals, his fading consciousness, and she refused to let him slip away. "Your pulse is weak but present. Focus on my voice. Breathe, even if it hurts. Just one breath at a time." CCX, the fight to stay, Ludwig tried. His chest burned, each inhale shallow, jagged. His body screamed to let go, to sink into the dark. But her voice, insistent, unrelenting, anchored him. The gunman's footsteps retreated, shouts in the distance signaling security closing in. But Ludwig barely registered it. All that existed was Kael's voice and the desperate rhythm of trying to pull air into his lungs. He collapsed fully onto his back, eyes fluttering half shut, the ceiling lights blurred into a single white haze. "Don't close your eyes, Ludwig. Not yet. I've got you. Help is coming." Her voice shook now, but she didn't stop. Cece and Twin, the threshold blood pooled beneath him, warm against the sterile floor. The world dimmed further, his heartbeat stuttering on Kael's screen, warning alerts flooding her console. "You're not allowed to leave me like this," Kael whispered fiercely into the mic. "Do you hear me? You don't break. Not now. Not ever." For a flicker of a moment, Ludwig's lips moved. No sound, just the ghost of a word. "Kael?" And then the darkness surged closer, threatening to claim him entirely. The race against time. Ludwig's pulse was faltering, each beat weaker than the last. The glowing device in his pocket pulsed in frantic rhythm, sending Kael every failing signal from his body. In her lab, Kael's eyes locked on the console, blood pressure dropping, oxygen saturation collapsing. Every red alert screamed the same truth. He was dying. No, not like this," she whispered, fingers flying across her keyboard. She overrode the device's emergency protocols, activating a failsafe she had never needed before. Remote intervention. A sharp hiss burst from the small device in Ludwig's pocket, a tiny injector sliding free from its casing. It jabbed into his thigh automatically, delivering a stabilizing cocktail Kael had designed for such a nightmare scenario. Adrenaline, coagulants, oxygen-rich nanofluid. Ludwig gasped as the surge hit his bloodstream, his eyes snapping half open, air burning in his lungs. Kael's voice filled the corridor through the comm system. You are not leaving me, Ludwig. Hold on. Just hold on. Help is seconds away. CCXX Foy. The rescue security rushed into the hallway, weapons drawn. The gunman was already gone, vanished into the chaos, but they didn't stop. Two officers dropped to Ludwig's side, checking the wound. He's still alive, one shouted. Get him to surgery now. The gurney arrived in seconds, and Ludwig was lifted, his blood smearing the sterile floor. The device in his pocket kept pulsing faintly, linked to Kael's console. She tracked his vitals every step as they rushed him through the hospital he had spent his life protecting. CCXX the Six. Kael's vigil, again. In her lab, Kael leaned against her console, sweat dripping down her temples. Her hands trembled, but her voice didn't falter. Stay with me, Ludwig. Don't you dare stop now. You don't break. Not tonight. Her screens showed his vitals hanging by a thread. Fragile, unsteady, but alive. For Kael, there was no doubt left. The next vest wouldn't just protect him, it had to become part of him. Because without it, without her constant presence woven into his life, the next time would be his last. The gurney's wheels screeched as Ludwig was pushed through the swinging doors of the operating theater. Floodlights seared down, surgical instruments gleaming under their shine. Nurses and surgeons moved like clockwork, their voices clipped, precise, urgent. Chest wound, single entry, a medic shouted. Pulse weak, pressure dropping, another responded. The surgeon's eyes narrowed as he looked at Ludwig. We don't have time. Prep him now. CC8. Kael's remote vigil. In her lab, Kael's monitors streamed his vitals in real time. The injections from her device had bought him minutes, no more. His heart was stumbling, each beat struggling to hold rhythm. Kael's knuckles turned white on the edge of the desk. She whispered into the comm, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. Ludwig, you're not allowed to give up now. Focus. Just focus on breathing. Let them work. Her own data feeds synchronized with the surgical theater's equipment. She could see every incision, every spike and drop in his vitals. It was as though she was in the room with him, her presence woven invisibly into the operation. CC Exit 9. On the edge, Ludwig floated in and out of consciousness, blinding lights above, muffled voices, the rhythmic beeping of monitors rising and falling like distant waves. But through the fog, one sound remained clear. Kael, don't close your eyes. You promised me you wouldn't break. And so, even as darkness tried to drag him under, Ludwig clung to the sound of her voice, the tether between his failing body and the fragile line of life that still held. The breaking point. The operating theater was chaos made precise. Hands moved with speed and discipline, blood loss stemmed, clamps applied, machines beeping in frantic rhythms. Pressure dropping, artery tear, major thoracic. Get me more suction now. But even as they fought, the monitors told a story that words could not soften. Ludwig's heart struggled, the rhythm faltering, his breath shallow, his skin paling beneath the harsh white lights. See sexy young. Kael's desperation. In her lab, Kael watched the vitals plummet in real time. Every warning light on her console flared crimson. No, 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 don't you dare, she whispered, tears blurring her vision. She slammed in overrides, desperate for the stabilizing device in his pocket to push harder, to give him even one more chance. Her voice cracked over the comm. Ludwig, listen to me. You're stronger than this. Don't break, not now. But his heart rate, the line she had listened to for months, the rhythm that had been her constant companion, was slipping. See Sith. The silence. The surgeon's voice cut sharp. We're losing him. A flurry of motion, compressions, injections, shocks. The monitors screamed their alarms, and then a single tone, unbroken, unchanging, flatline. Kael's console froze on the same terrible signal. No pulse, no rhythm, no sound of life left to hold. Her hand clamped over her mouth as her knees buckled under the weight of it. The one heartbeat she had sworn to guard was gone. The aftermath. The surgical team stood in silence, heads bowed, gloves stained red, the monitor above Ludwig's still body casting a pale glow across the room. Kael's voice came through the comm one last time, barely audible, more breath than sound. You promised me you wouldn't break. Her screens dimmed to silence, leaving only her reflection staring back, hollow-eyed, broken, and utterly alone. The silence after. The hospital was unusually still after the announcement. Word spread quietly among the staff. Dr. Ludwig Humbolt, the man who had saved countless lives, was gone. His patients whispered his name in waiting rooms. Nurses wept in quiet corners of the ward. Even the sterile walls seemed heavier without him walking the halls, but no one felt the silence more than Kael. CCXX lab. In her lab, the monitors were still running, the last readings frozen on the screen. Flatline, red alerts, silence. She hadn't turned them off. Couldn't. Her reflection stared back at her in the black glass of the consoles, eyes red and hollow. This was my fault, she whispered to no one. I should have pushed him harder to wear it. I should have. Her voice broke, but slowly, her trembling hands curled into fists. The grief burned, then hardened into something else. Resolve. CCXX6, a legacy of steel and flesh. On her workbench lay the unfinished prototype vest, the one Ludwig never got the chance to wear. Sleek, advanced, alive with sensors that pulsed like a heart. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the surface. You trusted me, she said softly, and I failed you. But I won't let them win. Not while I still breathe. The scarred man's words echoed in her memory. Break the Guardian. Break him. They had tried to sever her bond with Ludwig. Now they had. But what they hadn't counted on was that her grief would forge something stronger than anything she had built before. Vigilance Seth. Vigilance without end. Kael swiveled back to her console, pulling up the files she had saved of Ludwig's vitals. Every heartbeat, every breath, every reading she had ever monitored. The screens filled with data, lines, and rhythms that had once been him. She traced the curves of his heartbeat with her eyes, memorizing them, committing them to the core of the new system she was building. Your story doesn't end here, she whispered. If I can't protect you, then I'll protect them. All of them, every doctor, every responder, every life in the crossfire. Her fingers flew across the console, beginning the work of turning grief into legacy. The present. Kael sat alone in Ludwig's office. His desk was still neatly arranged, charts stacked, his pen resting where he had last set it down. The room carried his quiet order, his scent faintly lingering in the fabric of the chair. As she leaned forward, a sudden chill crept across her shoulders. A cold hand, or what felt like one, pressed lightly there. She froze, breath caught in her throat. She spun around. The office was empty, yet the sensation lingered. Not threatening, not frightening, familiar, comforting. Her lips trembled. Ludwig, the vest. Her eyes fell to the corner of the office. Draped over the back of his chair was the vest he had left behind before that final shift. The black fabric caught the faint light, its familiar weight a reminder of everything they had shared. Kael walked toward it slowly, hands trembling. She lifted the vest from the chair and pressed it against her chest, hugging it as though it were him. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks, but she didn't let go. CCXL, the whisper of the hall. For a moment, the office seemed to stir with presence. The air shifted, the lights flickered softly. She thought she heard it, not in the room, but somewhere between the walls and her heart. A voice, gentle, steady, familiar. Don't break. Her sobs quieted, her grip tightening around the vest. Whether it was memory, her mind, or something beyond, she didn't question it. She only held the last piece of him closer, the cold fading into warmth. The vest in her hands. Kael pressed the vest tighter against her chest. It was heavier than she remembered, the weight of Kevlar mixed with the weight of memory. The vest had been his shield, the one thing that had kept him alive through countless close calls, and the one thing he had not worn on his final night. She closed her eyes, and for a fleeting moment she swore she felt his warmth still in it. See Sextev. Echoes in the hospital. The corridors outside were quiet, but Kael heard something. Faint footsteps, like the ones Ludwig made when he walked his late-night rounds. She stepped into the hall, the vest still in her arms. The lights above flickered softly, and she could almost see his silhouette at the far end of the corridor. Not solid, not flesh, but a shimmer. A presence, her breath caught in her throat. Ludwig. The silhouette lingered a moment, then faded into the hum of the hospital. C.C.T. Exlery. The promise. Kael returned to the office, her hands gripping the vest tighter. Sitting at his desk, she placed it gently in front of her like an unspoken oath. You told me not to break, she whispered, and I won't. Not while your spirit still walks these halls. Not while your voice still echoes in me. She wiped her eyes and turned to the console, pulling up the schematics for the new vest, the one Ludwig never lived to see. But now it wouldn't just be technology. It would be his legacy, a way to ensure no other healer, no other protector would fall the way he did. CCX lit lingers. As she worked, the air shifted once more. A soft, cold breeze brushed her arm, and for just a moment, she felt the pressure of that unseen hand on her shoulder again. This time, she didn't flinch. She smiled faintly, eyes on the glowing blueprint. "Stay with me," she said softly. "We'll finish this together." And in the silence of the office, the faintest echo of a heartbeat seemed to answer. Ludwig had always belonged to the hospital. Its rhythm, its urgency, its endless demands, it was the place where he had given everything. And when his body failed him on the table, something deeper, something unyielding, refused to release him. His spirit remained. The corridors felt different now, echoes of him drifting with the hum of lights, the quiet shuffle of nurses' shoes, the mechanical sighs of ventilators. Patients sometimes stirred in their sleep, swearing they felt a calming presence nearby. A nurse once thought she saw his reflection in a window as she passed, coat trailing lightly in the corner of her eye. He could not leave. Not yet. CCXL 6. Kael's awareness. Kael was the first to notice. At night, when she sat in his office with the vest close to her, she would feel the air shift, the faintest flicker of movement, the weight of a hand, cool but steady, on her shoulder. The first time, she thought it was her grief, her exhausted mind projecting what she wanted to feel. But then the lights in the office dimmed and brightened, as if in rhythm with her words. She whispered, "Ludwig, is that you?" And the silence carried an answer. Not spoken, not sound, but a certainty in her chest. CCXL 7. The silent guardian words spread quietly among the staff. Security guards claimed that in moments of tension, they heard footsteps pacing the hall when no one was there. A patient who had collapsed swore a man in a white coat had kept him alive until the nurses arrived, though no such man had been on duty. Kael didn't discourage the stories. She knew the truth. Ludwig's spirit was bound to the place he had sworn to protect, still walking the halls as he always had, invisible but never absent. And in her heart, she realized he wasn't watching just the patients. He was watching her. CCXL 8, The New Oath. One night, Kael stood in the empty corridor, the vest clutched tightly against her chest. Her voice was steady, even through tears. "If you won't leave, then neither will I. I'll finish what you started, and I'll carry your work until no one else has to fall the way you did." The air stirred. The faint shimmer of a figure appeared down the hall, Ludwig's outline glowing softly blue, his gaze calm, protective, and though he spoke no words, Kael heard him as clearly as if he stood beside her. "Don't break." The board's decision. Weeks after Ludwig's passing, the hospital administration began making quiet plans. His office, the one where Kael had felt his presence most strongly, was scheduled to be cleared. Files archived, furniture repurposed, his vest locked away. To them, it was procedure. Offices never sat empty for long, but to Kael, the thought of erasing his presence was unbearable. Kael's stand. She requested a meeting with the board, standing at the long table where doctors and administrators debated policy. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady. "You want to clean out his office as though he never existed. But Ludwig Humboldt wasn't just another doctor. He gave his life to this place. His blood is in those halls. That office, it isn't just four walls, it's part of him." Some of the administrators exchanged uneasy glances. One cleared his throat. "Miss Kael, we all respected Dr. Humboldt, but sentiment cannot dictate." She cut him off, her tone sharp. "It's not sentiment, it's legacy. You want your patients and staff to believe this hospital is safe? Then don't erase the man who made it safe. Leave his office as it is, as a reminder, as a vow." CCLI. The decision. There was silence. Then slowly, the chief of medicine, an older woman who had known Ludwig for decades, nodded. "She's right. That office stays." The vote was unanimous. Ludwig's office would remain untouched, preserved as a memorial. His coat still draped over the chair, his books still lined on the shelf, his vest left where Kael had found it. CCLE. The living memory. That night, Kael returned to the office. The air was still, the faint shimmer of Ludwig's presence brushing against her shoulder once more. She set the vest carefully back on the chair, whispering, "They wanted to erase you, but I wouldn't let them. This place will remember. Always." For a moment, the overhead light flickered, steady, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. and Kael knew his spirit remained, bound not by tragedy, but by purpose. The office that breathed. The board's decision had been made. Ludwig's office would remain untouched. To others, it was just a room now, a shrine of sorts, still and silent. Staff walked past it with reverence, but none dared step inside. But for Kael, it was different. Every time she crossed the threshold, the air shifted. It was as though the room breathed. See leave, the first sight. One night, Kael sat at his desk, the vest folded neatly on the chair beside her. She was reviewing schematics, trying to refine the prototype that might have saved him. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the monitors. Then she felt it again, the cool touch at her shoulder. Her head turned slowly, and there he was. Ludwig. Not in flesh, not in color, but as a faint blue-hued figure. Transparent yet unmistakable. His lab coat shimmered faintly, his eyes calm and steady, fixed on her with the same unshakable focus he'd had in life. Kael froze, breath caught in her chest. Ludwig, he didn't speak, not with words, but his presence filled the room, and somehow she understood. He was still here. With her. Her secret Kael began visiting his office more often, always at night. To others, she said it was for her research or for inspiration. No one else saw what she did. When staff passed by, they saw only an empty chair, an untouched desk, a darkened room. But Kael saw him, standing near the shelves, leaning lightly against the wall, sometimes simply watching her work in silence, sometimes closer, near enough that she could almost feel his hand on her shoulder again. She never told anyone. The hospital staff already whispered about Ludwig's ghost roaming the halls. But what she knew, what she saw, belonged only to her. CCLVI, the silent partnership. One night, as she leaned over the vest trying to refine the sensor placement, she felt that quiet shift again. Looking up, she saw him behind her, luminous and calm. She whispered, voice trembling, "You stayed because of me, didn't you?" The air stirred. The desk lamp flickered, and though no words came, the answer resounded in her heart. Yes. The prototype schematics glowing faintly on the monitors, the vest folded neatly in her lap. She felt the air shift again, colder, heavier, charged with a presence she now knew too well. When she looked up, Ludwig's spirit stood before her, faintly blue, transparent, his gaze steady and calm. Her breath caught. "You're here." Slowly, his hand lifted, shimmering faintly in the dim light. He reached forward, not to her shoulder this time, but to her chest. Kael gasped softly as his hand passed through, settling over her heart. The touch was not warm. It was icy, sharp enough to send a shiver through her entire body. Yet beneath the cold there was a weight, not painful, but grounding. CCL Vate, the heart between them. Kael pressed a trembling hand over the spot, as if to hold his touch there. Her eyes filled with tears, but she did not look away. "Is this what kept you here?" she whispered. The cold deepened for a moment, then softened. A rhythm stirred in her chest, not her own heartbeat, but something layered over it, steady, calm, reassuring. For a fleeting moment, it was as though Ludwig's heart was beating inside hers. The lamp on the desk flickered once, twice, then steadied. CLIX. The promise etched. Kael leaned forward, whispering through tears, "You're in my heart now. I feel it. I'll carry you with me, always." The spirit's form shimmered faintly brighter, then faded slowly back toward the corner of the room, leaving behind only the chill that lingered over her heart. Kael placed a hand against her chest, her breaths uneven but strong. She understood now. Ludwig's spirit wasn't just bound to the hospital. A part of him lived within her, and she would never walk these halls alone again. The spirit box. Kael had always been a scientist. Her mind was wired for logic, evidence, and proof. But grief reshaped the edges of her thinking. She had already felt Ludwig's presence, seen his shimmering figure, felt his cold hand over her heart. That was undeniable to her. So one late night, she brought something new into his office, a spirit box. It was a simple device by appearance, one she had modified herself, a radio scanner running on custom software. Its purpose was to cut rapidly through frequencies, creating white noise that spirits could manipulate into words. She placed it on Ludwig's desk beside his vest and turned it on. LXI. The first attempt. The device hissed with static, the crackle filling the quiet room. Kael leaned forward, her hands trembling slightly. "Ludwig," she whispered, "if you can hear me, try to use this. Just a few words, anything." Dang. For a moment, there was nothing but noise, then faintly a break in the static. Kael, her breath caught, eyes widening. Ludwig, yes, I hear you. Say something else. The static shifted again, broken syllables straining through. With you. CCL twid, the strain of speech. Kael understood. Speaking drained him. Every word took energy. Every sound cost him strength. Don't push yourself, she said softly, tears gathering in her eyes. Just, just tell me what you need to. The spirit box crackled. Don't break. The same words he had said in life, the same vow he had given her when he was alive. Kael pressed her hand to her lips, choking back a sob. I won't, I promise. A fragile link. From that night on, Kael used the spirit box sparingly, never asking more than a word or two at a time. She learned to listen between the static, to catch the fragments of his voice that lingered in the hum of the hospital. It wasn't much, it wasn't enough, but to her, it was everything. Through the hiss of radio waves and the flicker of lights, Ludwig's spirit remained, still watching, still guiding, still bound to the halls where he had lived and died. And Kael, her hand resting on his vest, knew that as long as he could find a way to speak, she would never truly be alone. The warning. Several nights later, Kael sat in Ludwig's office again. The spirit box static on his desk, his vest folded neatly beside it. She hadn't meant to use it that night. She only wanted to sit in silence to feel close to him. But the box flared suddenly, its static spiking without her touch. Kael. She leaned forward instantly. I'm here. I hear you. The noise cracked and sputtered before forming words again. Danger. Coming. Her blood ran cold. What danger, Ludwig? Tell me. Hollow. The static spiked again, then dropped into silence. CCLXV. The hollow returns. Kael sat frozen, her heart pounding. Hollow. The same word she had uncovered in encrypted chatter, Project Hollow. The group that had hunted Ludwig while he lived. The group that had tried to sever them apart. And now, even after death, Ludwig was warning her. They weren't finished. CCL 6. The Oath Renewed. Kael turned off the spirit box, gripping it tightly in her hands. Her reflection in the dark monitor showed determination carved through her grief. They took you from me, she whispered, her voice low but fierce. But they will not take this hospital. They will not take your memory. If they want to come here again, they'll have to face both of us. The air in the room grew colder for a moment, then steadied. The faint flicker of the lamp above her swayed like a nod. Kael placed the vest back on the chair, her hands steady now. She wasn't just preserving Ludwig's legacy anymore. With his spirit still lingering in the halls, she was preparing for war. The unquiet night. Kael barely slept after Ludwig's fragmented warning through the spirit box. She sat in his office, lights dimmed, the vest draped across her lap like a shield she wasn't yet ready to wear. The word he had spoken, hollow, gnawed at her, its weight heavier than the silence that followed. Outside, the hospital was still. But Kael knew too well. Silence never meant safety. CCL 8. The spirit's restlessness. She returned the next evening, spirit box in hand, unsure if Ludwig could muster the strength to speak again so soon. But when she entered his office, she didn't need the device. He was already there. The faint blue shimmer of his form hovered by the window, lab coat faintly glowing as though catching moonlight. He turned when she stepped in, his eyes steady, his presence sharp. Kael's breath caught. You knew they weren't finished, didn't you? The air grew colder, enough that her breath fogged slightly in front of her. A soft flicker pulsed through the lamp, his way of answering. CCLX sign. Threads of conspiracy. Kael powered on her laptop, digging into the encrypted chatter she had intercepted before Ludwig's death. Project Hollow wasn't just a name, it was a network, hidden in fragments of digital ghosts across the web. And now Ludwig's spirit had confirmed it was moving again. She whispered to him, if you're bound here, maybe you're bound for a reason. Maybe you can guide me where I can't go alone. The spirit shimmered faintly, his outline stepping closer until she felt the familiar chill brush against her arm. The new war. Kael leaned forward at the desk, staring at his vest and the schematics glowing across her screen. They killed you, Ludwig. They think they won, but they don't understand they left you here, and now you're stronger than ever. The lights flickered again, once, twice, steady. Kael smiled faintly through her tears. Then let's finish this. You and me, the living and the ghost. And somewhere deep within the silence of the hospital, Kael swore she heard it. The faint echo of Ludwig's voice, carried through static and memory alike. Don't break. The shimmering guardian nights passed, with Kael working tirelessly in Ludwig's office, his vest folded neatly beside her. Each evening she returned, and each evening his spirit shimmered into view. Sometimes faint, sometimes strong, always silent, until she called for him. Though his words through the spirit box were rare, she felt his presence more directly. A flicker in the lamp when she doubted herself. A sudden cold brush at her side when she worked too long without eating. A shimmer in the corner of her eye when fear tried to overwhelm her. Ludwig wasn't gone. He was watching. CL Titweeth. The message in static one night, as the spirit box hummed softly on the desk, Ludwig gathered the strength to speak again. Kael. She leaned forward, her heart pounding. I'm here. I hear you. The static shifted, words breaking through in fragments. Hollow, inside. Already. Kael's blood ran cold. Inside the hospital, Ludwig, are you sure? The box sputtered, then fell silent, the energy spent. But she didn't need more. The message was clear. Project Hollow wasn't waiting outside anymore. They were already here. CCL 3, the investigation. From that night, Kael moved carefully through the hospital. She began monitoring staff activity, cross-checking names, movements, and records against the fragments of data she had intercepted before. It was subtle, quiet work. She couldn't accuse anyone outright, not without proof, but she felt Ludwig's spirit trailing close, the faintest cold shift of air each time she entered a new ward, as though he were guiding her away from danger, or toward it. CCLX 14, the encounter. Her search finally brought her to the sublevel, an old storage corridor few staff ever visited. She shouldn't have been there, but something in Ludwig's presence urged her on. The lamp above her flickered, his silent signal to stop, but she didn't, because down the hall she heard it, the soft murmur of voices, the scrape of metal against metal. She pressed herself against the wall, heart racing. Project Hollow. They were here. CCL ect. The cold touch again. Her fear nearly paralyzed her, but then she felt it. The same cold touch against her chest, directly over her heart. Ludwig's spirit. It wasn't just comfort this time. It was a push, a reminder. Don't break. Kael swallowed hard, her hands tightening into fists. She whispered into the empty air, Then guide me, Ludwig. We'll face them together. And with his cold strength pressing steady against her heart, Kael stepped forward into the shadows of the sublevel, where the hollow waited. The shifting silence. The hospital felt wrong. Kael had worked within its walls for years, and she knew its rhythm, the hum of machines, the shuffle of staff, the whispers of patients. But tonight, the silence wasn't stillness. It was suppression, as though something unnatural pressed down over the halls. She carried the spirit box tucked against her side, Ludwig's vest slung over her arm. Every so often, she turned it on, desperate for his voice. But only static came through. Come on, Ludwig, she whispered. I need you. CCLX feared footsteps in the dark. She moved cautiously through a sublevel corridor, the one Ludwig's spirit had guided her toward before. The lights overhead buzzed faintly, flickering in uneven rhythm. Then, footsteps, not hers, not hurried like a doctor's or nurse's, but deliberate. Heavy. Wrong. Kael pressed herself against the wall, holding her breath. She clutched the vest to her chest as though it could shield her. The footsteps grew closer, then paused. A voice echoed in the corridor, low and cold. She's here. CCLX 6, the Hollow Men. From the shadows emerged two figures in plain clothes, but their eyes betrayed them. Alert, predatory, scanning the dark with purpose. One carried a duffel bag, its outline too angular, too heavy to be anything but weapons. Kael's pulse raced. Inside the hospital, he was right. She reached for the spirit box with trembling hands, flicking it on. Static filled the air, then faintly a voice strained through. Kael, run. Her heart jumped. Ludwig. He wasn't gone. Not yet. CCLX 7. The cold touch returns. As the men turned down the corridor toward her, Kael felt it again, the icy pressure over her heart, Ludwig's touch, his warning, his guidance. Tears stung her eyes, but she gritted her teeth. Not this time, she whispered to herself. I won't break. Clutching the vest tighter, she turned and ran, Ludwig's spirit at her side, not strong, not whole, but enough to guide her into the coming storm. The trap tightens. Kael ducked into a stairwell, clutching Ludwig's vest in one arm, modified spirit box in the other. Her breath was sharp in her chest, her pulse racing. But the sound of boots followed. Heavy, steady, purposeful. These weren't amateurs. They weren't here to frighten her. They were here to end her. She could hear their voices echoing up the stairwell. Orders are clear. She's the last link. Terminate her like we did the doctor. Kael froze, her stomach dropping. Terminate. That was the word they had used for Ludwig. Sisa, the spirits flicker. She switched on the spirit box, desperate. Static hissed and cracked. Then, faintly, Kael, fight. Her throat tightened. Ludwig, they're after me. They want to do the same thing they did to you. The static broke again, stronger this time. Not alone. The air shifted. The cold touch brushed her heart once more. His spirit was here, faint, flickering, but determined. CCXC, prepared to kill. The stairwell door below slammed open. Two figures entered, their silhouettes sharp against the fluorescent light. They carried compact weapons, silencers gleaming under the dim glow. One lifted a comm device to his mouth. They target cornered, end this clean. Kael's grip tightened on the vest. She had no weapons, no armor, just her mind, her grief, and Ludwig's ghost at her side. CCXCI, the resolve, her breath steadied. If they thought she would be as vulnerable as Ludwig had been without his vest, they were wrong. She whispered into the air to him, "Guide me, Ludwig, one last time." The lamp above flickered violently, and the cold grew sharper. Ludwig's spirit pressed closer, filling her with both fear and resolve. Kael turned, facing the stairwell door, her silhouette outlined against the dark. If Hollow wanted to terminate her, they would find out the hard way. She wasn't alone. The cornering Kael ran, guided by Ludwig's fading cold presence, but Hollow's agents were faster. They knew the hospital's hidden corridors, the blind spots in the cameras, the places she thought were safe. She turned a corner and froze. Three men stood waiting. Their weapons were already raised. Behind her, boots thundered closer. She was surrounded. The spirit box in her hand sputtered violently, static hissing. Then Ludwig's voice broke through, ragged and strained. "Kael, fight!" Tears blurred her eyes. "I can't. Not this time." CCX-3. The shot. One of the men stepped forward, silencer gleaming at the muzzle of his gun. His voice was calm, chillingly matter-of-fact. "You've carried his work far enough. Now you'll follow him." The shot cracked, muffled but sharp in the narrow hall. Kael gasped, the force slamming into her chest. Pain exploded through her ribs, her knees buckling as she collapsed against the wall. The spirit box clattered to the ground, hissing static. "Kael." Ludwig's voice broke through, urgent, furious, but weak. Her vision blurred, the hospital spinning, the cold of his presence flooding over her in desperation. Between worlds. On the floor, Kael clutched Ludwig's vest to her chest. Her breath came shallow, her heartbeat faltering. The men above her watched in silence, their mission nearly complete. But as the darkness began to close in, she felt it again. Ludwig's hand, cold but steady, pressing against her heart, and then his voice clearer than ever before, not from the box, but from within her. "Don't break." The hall around her pulsed with cold air, lights flickering violently, as if the very walls of the hospital rejected what was happening. The Hollow agents faltered, stepping back. Kael was between two worlds, one step from Ludwig, one heartbeat away from death. And in that fragile moment, something shifted. Kael pressed her trembling hands against the gunshot wound in her chest, fighting to keep pressure on it, fighting to stay conscious. Her breath came in shallow gasps, vision swimming. "Stay awake," she told herself. "Don't let go. Don't break." But the bullet had cut too deep. Warmth spilled through her fingers. Her strength was draining fast, slipping away no matter how hard she clung to it. The Hollow agents watched coldly from a distance, satisfied with their work, not even bothering to finish her. The wound would do it for them. CCX-CV6, the vision only she could see. Her body was heavy, her eyelids sinking despite her desperate will. The corridor tilted, shadows stretching unnaturally across the walls. The spirit box at her side crackled and fell silent. And then, the air grew cold again. Familiar. Kael lifted her head weakly, her eyes blurring, and saw him. Ludwig. Standing just ahead of her, his figure glowing faintly blue, calm and steady. His lab coat drifted like mist, his eyes fixed on her with both sorrow and strength. Tears slid down her cheeks. "Ludwig," she breathed, her voice broken, barely sound. For the first time since his death, he reached out to her fully, his hand extended, shimmering, waiting. The choice. The pain in her chest blurred into numbness, her body weakening beyond repair. But her heart, the same heart Ludwig had once touched with his spirit, beat in rhythm with his presence. Her hand lifted shakily from the vest she still clutched, reaching toward his. The world around her faded. The hospital, the hollow agents, the cold, sterile walls. All that remained was him, waiting with infinite patience. His lips moved, and though his voice did not sound in the corridor, she heard it in her soul. Don't break. Walk with me. Between two worlds, Kael's fingers trembled as they stretched toward Ludwig's hand. The corridor around her dissolved into haze, the hollow men's cold gazes blurring, the walls vanishing into shadow. All that remained was the faint glow of his spirit, steady and unwavering. Her chest burned, her breath shallow. She knew she couldn't survive the wound, but in that moment, the pain mattered less. What mattered was him. Tears slipped down her cheek as her lips parted. I, I found you. Ludwig's spirit reached closer, his shimmering hand nearly brushing hers. Shh, CCXCX, the crossing. The instant their hands almost touched, Kael felt it, not cold this time, but a surge of warmth flooding her chest, stronger than the pain, stronger than the blood pooling beneath her. It wasn't her heartbeat, it was his. The corridor seemed to split in two, one path stretching into blinding light where his figure glowed brighter, the other pulling her back toward the fading echo of alarms and hurried footsteps. Ludwig's lips moved, the words not spoken aloud but pressed directly into her soul. With me or stay. The last glimpse. Kael gasped, her hand trembling, torn between the light of his presence and the shadowed weight of the world behind her. For the first time since his death, his eyes weren't only calm, they were pleading. He didn't want her to suffer as he had, but he also didn't want her to give up. The hollow agents, watching, muttered uneasily as the corridor lights flickered violently. One stepped back. What the hell is happening? But Kael didn't hear them anymore. All she saw was Ludwig's hand reaching for her, the choice pulling her heart apart. The pull of two worlds. Kael's hand hovered in the air, trembling as her vision dimmed. The hospital corridor blurred away. All she saw was Ludwig's hand extended toward her, glowing with a quiet, patient strength. Her chest ached, her breath rattled. She knew she couldn't last much longer. The hollow agents loomed behind her, but their voices were drowned out by the flickering lights, the electric hum of something far greater than them. Kael's lips parted, whispering his name. Ludwig. The plea for the first time since his death, Ludwig's spirit moved closer, his figure sharper, his hand glowing brighter. His eyes, calm, sorrowful, unyielding, locked on hers. She felt his voice inside her, not through the spirit box, not through the static, but in the very beat of her failing heart. Don't break, but live. Tears welled in her eyes. I can't without you. His shimmering hand brushed hers, cold but grounding. His lips moved again. Then live for me. The sacrifice. The instant their hands touched, Kael felt her heart jolt violently, like a defibrillator shock tearing her back from the edge. Pain lanced through her chest, but with it came strength, his strength, pouring into her, forcing her to breathe again. Her eyes snapped wide as her pulse steadied, shallow but present. Her lungs filled raggedly, pulling her back from the brink. But Ludwig's figure flickered, the glow around him dimmed, his outline dissolving like mist in the wind. No, Kael sobbed, clutching at the empty air. Don't go, please. His voice came one last time, barely a whisper in her soul. Always, with you. And then he was gone. The hollow men's fear. The hollow agents, shaken by the surge of energy and the violent flickering of the hospital lights, stepped back in unease. One muttered, "What the hell was that?" Kael, still bleeding, still weak, pushed herself against the wall, clutching Ludwig's vest. Her breath was shallow, her body broken, but her eyes were aflame. "You'll never erase him," she rasped, "and you'll never erase me." The agents hesitated, for the first time uncertain, because even though Ludwig's spirit had faded from sight, something lingered in the air. The echo of his presence, stronger than fear, stronger than death. The fragile spark, Ludwig's spirit, had pulled her back from the brink for a moment. Her heart lurched, her lungs filled with air she hadn't expected to breathe again. For one fragile instant, she believed she could stand, fight, and carry him with her. But The hollow agents had not come unprepared. CCCI, the finishing blow. They advanced as her body sagged against the wall, her blood pooling at her knees. One spoke flatly, almost without emotion. She was supposed to die clean. Don't let her linger. Kael tried to push herself up, clutching Ludwig's vest as if it could shield her, but her legs gave way. The leader raised his silenced pistol and aimed steadily at her head. For one heartbeat, the world froze. She felt Ludwig's cold presence surge around her, a desperate shield of light. His voice thundered in her chest one last time. Don't break. The shot cracked. Kael's body fell still. The spirit box fizzled into silence. The lights overhead steadied. The vanishing light. Ludwig's spirit, faint and ragged, knelt where her body lay. For the first time since his death, he let himself falter. He reached for her, but there was nothing left to hold. No heartbeat to anchor, no breath to catch. The tether between them snapped. His glow fractured like glass in the dark, scattering into nothing. The hollow men glanced at the corridor one last time before slipping back into the shadows. Their mission was complete. CCCA. The empty office days later, Ludwig's office remained untouched. The vest still rested on the chair, Kael's modifications unfinished, the spirit box silent. The staff passed by with whispers, speaking of two souls gone too soon. But in the stillness of the room, the lamp flickered once, faint and uncertain, as if some echo lingered, refusing to die completely. Next, the crossing. The last sound Kael heard in the mortal world was the silenced shot, the static of the spirit box collapsing into nothing. Her body sagged, heavy and cold, and for a brief instant she felt nothing. Then, light. It wasn't the harsh glare of hospital lamps, nor the flickering bulbs of the old corridor. It was warm, soft, and endless. The pain in her chest was gone. The weight of grief, fear, and exhaustion had slipped away like a shadow burned off by morning sun. She stood, whole again, in a place between worlds, an endless plain of shimmering light and distant echoes. The waiting figure. And there he was, Ludwig. Not pale, not strained, not the flickering ghost she had known in the hospital, but whole. His lab coat brushed at his sides, his shoulders straight, his eyes clear. He stood calmly, waiting, just as he had when he greeted patients in life. Kael froze, her hand pressed to her chest. Ludwig? He stepped forward, the same faint smile tugging at his lips, gentle, reassuring, the smile she had missed so much. You didn't break, he said, his voice steady, warm. You found me. Her tears spilled freely as she ran into his arms, and for the first time since his death, she felt his embrace, no longer cold but warm and unyielding. The reunion. Kael clung to him, her voice trembling. I thought I lost you. I thought I was alone. You were never alone, Ludwig murmured, his hands steady against her back. Not when I was there. Not now. Not ever. She pulled back, searching his eyes. Is this the end? He shook his head slowly. Not an end. A crossing. You walked with me. The endless light shimmered brighter, surrounding them both in its warmth. Together beyond, Kael laced her fingers through his, pressing her forehead to his chest where his heartbeat thrummed strong and steady. For the first time since she'd known him, it was her heart that was silent, and his that carried them forward. Where do we go? She whispered. Ludwig's hand brushed her cheek as the light expanded around them, endless and inviting. Together, he said. And with that, the two stepped forward, no longer bound by hospitals, by war, by wounds, or by hollow. Doctor and guardian, scientist and soul, finally whole, beyond the veil. Epilogue. The quiet light. The hospital carried on. Patients came and went, doctors rotated through shifts, and the endless rhythm of healing continued. Yet something lingered in the halls, whispers, not of fear, but of memory. Staff swore they sometimes felt watched over, especially in the darkest hours of the night. Patients spoke of dreams where a calm doctor with kind eyes stood at their bedside, urging them to breathe, to hold on. And in the old office, untouched since that terrible night, the lamp flickered gently as if stirred by a presence unseen. The legend grew. Two protectors bound to the hospital, a doctor who had given everything, and the brilliant woman who had carried his heart even beyond death. Beyond the veil. In the afterlife, Kael and Ludwig walked together, hand in hand, their burdens finally shed. No bullets, no shadows, no hollow to hunt them. Only peace, only light. Kael rested her head against his shoulder, her voice soft. We couldn't finish it in life. Ludwig squeezed her hand, his gaze steady, but we finished what mattered, and together they stepped into the endless horizon, guardians no longer of halls and wards, but of one another, eternal, unbroken. Final note. Their story didn't end with Hollow's violence. It ended where it began, in a hospital where two souls who refused to break found one another again. Not in life, but in the light beyond it.